kid's head where the sound comes in.
Yeah, the closer you can talk into the microphone, the better, but it will pick up noise also.
Yeah.
So if you have to mute that little gray button right underneath the line. It's fine.
Okay.
I didn't hear anything.
No, I didn't hear you.
So I think
So they're gonna hear
we're
me
okay.
spin my eyes every single time, stir up my drink. Gotta get, yeah. We're gonna get an email from someone, whoever is, knock it off.
You were both making faces as though there was something shocking going on. And I've turned my mic off, so it couldn't be me. The best start to the day.
I like that one. Remember that. I thought my camera was off.
So you saw my sign there, I was like, my entrance.
That's your entrance, yeah?
Yeah, that's right there, that's why I'm there.
Oh my gosh.
We're almost there. Does anybody need pens or highlighters or something? I think there's something that work.
I'm
Do you need
searching for
anything?
my favorite pen.
Do you need it?
Do you have my favorite pen?
Oh,
I think
there's
I have
stuff there.
everything here.
Oh, yeah, it's all of this.
Thank you, guys. Hospitality bags. Swag. Swag.
Okay. I'm going to call to order the Amber County Budget Committee for Monday, May 2nd, 2022. It is 9 o'clock in the morning. Welcome, everybody. It's going to be the most fun you'll ever have this year for the next 3 days.
We are already having.
And so our first item of business is to have the election of the officers. And the first consideration is for the chair of the budget committee. Do I have any nominations for chair?
Chair, I would move that we approve this gentleman here, Denny Elmer, as a chair. And I'm getting a second, maybe. Oh, we need a second.
I second that.
I saw when there was that big smile coming at you that you had no choice.
Sorry.
Okay, Commissioner Kula moves to appoint Denny Elmer as chair of the budget committee for 2022. Commissioner Starrett has seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And the second position we are nominating for is a secretary. Do I have a nomination for secretary?
Chair, I would say that I would move that we approve Jason Fields, but I actually want to say welcome to him first and thanks for serving before nominating for this, moving this nomination.
Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a second for Jason Fields for secretary?
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Starrett seconds. Any further discussion? No? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
Chair,
And I do want to welcome everyone. We have Denny Elmer and Doreen App, who is joining us virtually as our returning budget committee members. So thank you for your participation over these 3 days. And then we also have our newest member, Jason Fields. Thank you for serving and joining us through this process. I hope it's not as daunting as it was for me the first time. It's kind of a fire hose for a couple days, but thank you for being here.
You bet.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then
Okay.
the one part I would just add is Doreen is joining us via Zoom, and hopefully I see that Doreen, you've unmuted. Hopefully you can hear us okay. And if you wouldn't mind just saying something so we can make sure we hear you.
Hello and good morning. I see you perfectly. Thank you. Can you hear me? I can hear you fine.
Here's that she's talking.
Yeah. See raised hand. It's not muted.
So Doreen, we see your hand raised, but we don't hear you.
Okay.
We could all turn it off and turn it back on.
Must have checked if your computer is muted. Sometimes it's the issue.
Hello?
Yeah, Doreen, you might want to leave the meeting and rejoin. Sometimes that'll reset if your microphone didn't connect. All right, while we're working out the technical issues, we can go ahead and keep moving forward with the agenda.
Okay.
We still have a quorum.
So Doreen, if you can hear us, maybe try leaving the meeting and then coming back in. That might work.
She says her side is unmuted and it says it's, excuse me, working and she can hear us. Her side is unmuted.
Okay. We're not able to.
Doreen, if you can hear us, you can, okay.
think
you
she's
went
off
away.
now.
Okay, and then try to get back on.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, we can move to item 3, which is consideration of approval of the minutes from May 3rd, 2021.
I would suggest we pass it. Do we do that now?
Yeah.
We pass it off to chair.
Oh,
You can
Yes.
pass
I
the
didn't mean to
gavel.
be rude. I
Sorry.
was just.
No, you're trying to
Giving over my
take all
gavel.
It's stealing my thunder.
I know, I was like,
Please
oh,
proceed, Chair Elmer.
I'll be the best.
All right. All right, well then let's move on to 4. Or 3, consideration of approval of minutes from May 3rd last year.
I move approval, Chair.
Any second?
Oh, yeah, I'll second.
All right, any discussion? Minutes from last year? All right, all in approval of accepting these minutes from last year, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes. All right. And you're up.
All right.
I think. we
Well, I'll
couldn't
delay
get
a
her-
minute while Doreen is
Yeah.
joining. So I have some.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What I handed out is just a copy of the presentation. I'll go through here. I'll start here in just a moment. Just when we thought that we'd be through all the technology issues and not having to do virtual meetings any longer. So. it's on that end when you get the. And if Doreen, if you can hear, Megan moved to promote you to the panel. And so you should have a pop-up window that is telling you would like to promote you to the panel. And if you hit OK.
She says she can't see the panel at this time. Can't see the panel this time.
There we go. There we go. Can you hear us okay, Doreen?
Can you hear me now?
Okay. I see you're attempting to talk, but there might be an issue with the microphones on
She
your
said,
end.
I can hear you, but you can't hear me.
Yeah,
And the
Okay.
volume is up on her computer.
all right. So what I'll do is, if the chair's okay, we can go ahead and jump into the presentation. And then when we find a break, maybe we can get on the phone and see if we can help troubleshoot what's happening. So Doreen, if you have any questions or anything that comes up, if you raise your hand and then we can figure out an alternative. It sounds like Doreen's texting with Commissioner Starrett. So
She'll be able to
Can-
raise her hand if we need to.
Right. Is there a chat that she can type questions into? Maybe?
We've done phone before, long before this. We've done just regular old phone.
But again, I can jump right into the presentation
Okay.
to make sure we
Okay.
stay on schedule, and then we'll have some breaks that we'll
Okay.
be able to help. So, all right. Make sure I can see everything. All right, well, off to a bang. So here we go. All right, well, so good morning, Budget Committee. Just want to take this opportunity, number one, welcome you to Budget Committee Week. For the fiscal year 22-23 budget. In particular, I want to welcome Doreen, Denny, and Jason and thank you very much for your willingness to serve on the Budget Committee and help us get through this very important process that we go through every single year. I will say, for the budget team and I, we kick this process off in October each year when we start building our internal tables and getting budget instructions issued out. And then departments really jump into building the budgets into January. And then February and March, there's a lot of review of the budgets. All that for the purpose of getting ready to present this proposed budget that you're going to see over the next 3 days to get it ready to take us one step further into getting closer to budget adoption. So we can continue to deliver services from the new fiscal year. Again, I know the time commitment for 3 days, it's a challenge for any volunteer. And so again, I just want to say thank you very much for dedicating your time to help us get through this process. In the binders, each of you will have a binder. You're going to have individual departmental narratives in your notebook, and you're shortly going to hear, starting with Health and Human Services will be the first presentation. But for today and tomorrow, you're going to hear presentations from all the various department heads. And we are going to go through that entire budget and have presentations. And we're ready to answer questions that you have, whether it's about services, budget, why we built it a certain way. If there's any questions that come up about what's presented in the budget, or if you're having a hard time tracking where we're at in the budget, because I know sometimes when my team and I start getting into our budget lingo and getting into GL codes and going to funds and divisions, and I realize that we're speaking a different language for most folks. Feel free, stop us, raise the questions, because what's most important to me is that you have an understanding of what we've proposed and what's built into the budget. And again, on Wednesday, we're looking to get an approval on this approved budget, so then we can go to the next step. So just some housekeeping items as we go through for the next few days. This is kind of unique. This is the first time that we've been in room 32 in a couple years. Last year it was fully virtual. The year before it was a hybrid of where it was just a smaller group of us, and then all the presenters were joining us via Zoom. This year we do have a hybrid approach as well, that both ensure compliance with a lot of the statutory updates about public meeting laws, but then it's also for transparency purposes and a better opportunity for the public to join and view the budget process, which again, this is critical. This is all the funds that come into the county and how we support services each fiscal year for the county. And then restrooms are across the hall. We have coffee, we have food, we have lunches that are on order for the budget committee members. And thank you to Carolina and Megan for taking care of all of that and making sure that we have plenty of caffeine and food to power through the next 3 days.
Here.
Yes, thank you.
Mostly to the.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Carolina thought I was referring to caffeine. I was actually referring to you.
So kind of, every year I try to include this overview, which I think it's a good reminder for those of you that have been involved with the budget process, but those that are new to the budget process, it's really important to see this overview. And for those in the public that are watching this, again, what is our budget? It's our financial plan for the next year. We estimate our expenditures and revenues for a single year. We run on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. Everything that we're doing as part of the meetings this week and all the process that we went through to build these budgets are governed by Oregon budget law, which is ORS Chapter 294, which establishes the procedures on how we go through this budget adoption process. And where we're at for this week is the required citizen involvement for the preparation of the budget and public disclosure of the budget before formal adoption. That's what we're here accomplishing today. So we have an equal number of citizen members, budget committee members to the elected Board of Commissioners that comprises the budget committee. Tonight, we're going to have our first hearing on the budget. So tonight at 5:30, there will be a hearing that we will open up, that we'll receive comments or funding requests that may be coming forward as part of the hearing like we do each year. And if you look at the timeline, like I mentioned before, in December, the board approved the initial discretionary allocation. In January, budget instructions were adopted by the board and issued to the department heads. February and March, our administration team worked with departments and did an overview of all the various initial budgets. And here we are in May with the budget committee. And then in June, there will be a second budget hearing that'll be held. And then the Board of Commissioners will consider adopting the new budget in June. So before we get too far into the budget message, again, this is a slide that I've had for the last couple of years, the pandemic. We've not only with the budget committee meetings, but in just day-to-day operations throughout the county, we've been dealing with the pandemic since March of 2020. And it's not been without its challenges. And so the county's been operating under declared emergencies for the last 3 fiscal years. I also want to recognize that in particular, HHS, our public health division, has been on the forefront in responding to the pandemic and has done an outstanding job. And you'll hear more about the public health team and HHS when Director Manford makes her presentation after I finish my budget message. Another emphasis is over the last 3 fiscal years, all of our county departments have continued to deliver essential services. We haven't shut down. There hasn't been a reduction in service. We had to modify how we delivered those services. But again, over the last 3 years, we've continued to press forward and deliver services through some very challenging and difficult times. And that's law enforcement, public health, parks, you name it. All through this, we continued to deliver services. And then there's been some unique things that have come forward, which are more specific to the budgets for each year, is funding. In previous fiscal years, we had a lot of discussions around the CARES Act. There was reimbursement funds that the county received to help offset some of our pandemic response activities. But the biggest one is the American Rescue Plan Act right now, which I'll go into more detail in some follow-up slides. But the county received almost $21 million in direct allocation from the U.S. Treasury. We received the first tranche last year in May of 21. We're expecting the second half later this month. And the board has been working on prioritizing where those funds are going to be applied. And you're going to see more details when I get to Fund 32, which is a specific special revenue fund that we have set up for our ARPA funds. And it's important to note that in addition to the 21 million, we also received an additional 2.3 million from the state as part of the state's ARPA allocation via Senator Boquist, and that was specific for rural broadband expansion projects. So the American Rescue Plan, lingo, we always call it ARPA. And so, bear with me. That's what I'll probably end up doing as I'm going through my presentation. I'll continually refer to it as ARPA. Like I said before, we're going to receive a direct allocation. Unlike CARES Act was strictly reimbursement. So we had an allotment for CARES Act funds, and then as soon as we had the expenses, we had to apply for reimbursement. This is a lot different. We received the funds directly. And I already mentioned about receiving the first and second payments. We set up the special revenue fund in the current year budget, fiscal year 21-22, to make sure that that was fully appropriated. So depending on how quickly we have rolled out programs, the funds would be immediately available. A good example of that is almost $7 million in grants were approved for water and sewer infrastructure projects across the county for various water districts and municipalities who submitted proposals. The one emphasis I'd like to make, and I know this can be challenging at times, because when you see $21 million that come into the budget, and we really have to remember that these are one-time funds. Once they're spent, they're spent. So it's something that we're looking very closely at on the types of programs that we roll out, because again, once the funds are spent, we're not expecting any more allocation. It's not adding to our revenues per se. It's a one-time fund. So once the funds are spent, they're spent. So the next one is an overview. This was work that the Board of Commissioners were doing that prioritized based on the eligible uses for the ARPA funds. So we had public health response at 15%. Economic impacts were 33%. Included in that economic impact were nonprofit grants, impacted industries, childcare is all rolled up into that category. We had 14% identified for revenue loss, And the one thing that I'll note here, and it's more of a reporting requirement, but the US Treasury updated the rules, and counties and other jurisdictions can take up to $10 million, identify that as revenue loss, and do those moves, and then they're done with the reporting. There is going to be some work, but that's more of a reporting end of things, that we're going to be looking to move some of the other categories, identify it under the revenue loss category with the US Treasury, but still roll it out based on the priorities of funding that were set by the Board of Commissioners. Though I mentioned before, the water and sewer infrastructure represented a third of the funds, and then broadband infrastructure was 5%, which that 1 million is, and then the additional 2.3 million that we received directly from the state. So a total of $3 million being available for rural broadband infrastructure type projects. So this is just to give a really brief overview. I'm not necessarily going to get into the details of each of these programs and how they're rolled up. But the other important thing to note is based on the board, what they determine as the priorities and how they set this up. 70% of the funds are going to services outside of the county. So 70% of our total ARPA allocation is intended to go out to various grant programs and businesses. So if you look at the economic impact, the water sewer infrastructure, the broadband, all of those categories represent 70% of the funds. The other 30%, or it's actually 29% that's identified, it's really looking at, and what I have identified to bolster those internal services to make sure that we're building resilience, making an investment in our public health division, make sure we're ready for the next thing. Our public health team did an amazing job responding to the pandemic, but at the same time, we also recognize that there's some areas of improvement to where we need to make some better investments, and facilities probably being the number one. I don't have to look. Lindsay's probably nodding her head behind me, but you know, we do need to make some investments in our own services to make sure that we build that resilience and we're ready for the next event that takes place. So again, this slide just shows that allocation just in a pie chart. So you can see, again, the public health response and the revenue lost is really what we have identified for internal services. The other 71% is actually going out the door to various grant programs that we've rolled out. Any questions on ARPA funds before I move on? And if I'm going too quickly, please let me know. All right. So that was really quick on ARPA. Again, it's not every day that we get a $21 million allotment of funds directly from the federal government and put into the budget. That's why I wanted to make sure we take some time to go over that in a little more detail. For the next part of my presentation, we're going to get into more details or more specifics to the proposed budget that we're going to be talking about for the next 3 days. So this first slide that I have here up on the screen is the 21-22 adopted budget, which is our current fiscal year. And it just shows that breakdown based on the budget size. So this is revenue and expenditures combined. Again, as you can see, the largest department for the current fiscal year is Health and Human Services at 28%. They also represent, more than half of our FTEs with the county. It's a large department. That's why Director Manfred gets to present right after me and gets to take most of the morning for the presentation because it's a large budget. So again, you see that Health and Human Services, then you see the criminal justice and internal services are the next two larger categories. Typically, internal services is not that large. It's that large because that's where the ARPA funds are. That's where we budgeted the ARPA funds. Fund 32 is included in those internal services as a total, even though we're spending that money out of there and supporting grant programs out in the community, it's still part of internal services. And so I'm anticipating that once we start rolling out and start cutting checks in more of those categories, you're going to see internal services getting back down to the normal size. It's just skewed a little bit with the ARPA funds. So that's our current fiscal year, which was a $179 million budget. So the next for 22-23, the proposed budget, again, you can see where the changes are applied. Again, HHS is still the largest department. And then community justice is second. And then you see how the internal services reduced a little bit because we did spend, almost $7 million for the water and sewer infrastructure program. So that reduction, you'll start to see that in this current fiscal year.
And what's a more typical percentage?
That's a good question. I don't have that number right in front of me, but I could get that for you.
Is it, yeah, 15 or so? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So the total proposed budget is actually larger than last year. It's $189 million for the fiscal year. And again, we're, with the carryover and beginning balances and the carryover of ARPA funds and some additional revenues that the county also received, that budget, again, continues to be, this is our largest budget that Yamhill County's ever adopted or had proposed. Last year was the record breaker with 179, and this continues to be. But I anticipate that as we start to roll these funds out, because the ARPA funds also are subject to spending timelines when the funds have to be appropriated and fully spent, that in future fiscal years, the other revenues aren't growing at the same pace. So once we, again, ARPA is having an influence on the total size of the budget. And so I anticipate that in future years, we'll be back down in that $160 million range moving forward, unless there's other new revenues that come up into the future. So any questions so far on the overview of the budget? All right, now specifically, we're going to talk at the high level about the various revenue categories. So this slide, you're going to see the breakdown of the various types of revenues that we have coming in. The important one, you'll see the one slide for taxes, which represents our discretionary funds, which is our property taxes, only represents 14% of the total revenues. You see that we have a lot of funds that come in from intergovernmental. Again, you look at Department of Community Justice, the adult community corrections. They're primarily funded by state grant and aid to support those operations. Health and Human Services has a very small amount when you look at their total budget of discretionary funds that come in. The rest of it is intergovernmental agreements with the state, Medicaid funds, et cetera. And then you'll see that we have fees and charges, and internal charges is another category. And again, a lot of the internal charges are charges that we charge internal services for building up things like capital reserve, insurance reserve, some of those funds that in order to keep the lights on, pay our liability insurance or workers' comp insurance, all the other things that come under those categories. Any questions on the various revenue categories? And you'll see the balances are a pretty high number. And again, when you have a carryover of 11 million in of ARPA funds, that's going to have an influence on those balances. But I would also highlight that there's a lot of drivers to those balances, and I'll get into more specific because I have some slides later on where we talk more about beginning balances and really where how that number is derived.
You're doing great so far.
All right. Okay. So again, this slide is just a comparison between the current fiscal year and the new fiscal year, looking at the revenues. Again, you see balances are up. You see intergovernmental is down because again, that we're anticipating this current fiscal year that we're going to receive the full 20 million. And so that's why you see such a substantial drop from the current fiscal year to next fiscal year in the revenue numbers for intergovernmental. Because again, we received, $10 million last fiscal year. We're receiving another $10 million this fiscal year. And those funds, again, are one-time funds. And so we're not going to see it in the proposed fiscal year. But those funds are still going to carry forward as part of the balance. Any unspent funds that we receive this current fiscal year that we haven't spent are going to be carried forward as a balance. And then you'll see that there's a change in the internal charges. A lot of that has to do with some transfers that are occurring that are associated with the ARPA allocation. Under those two categories that I talked about, the public health and the revenue replacement, there's some budgetary functions that we have to build into the budget in order to transfer those funds to those departments. So then they're fully appropriated and the department can spend the funds. So you're going to see an uptick there for this proposed budget. In future budget years, that number is going to come down quite a bit. It's important to call out, it's not that administration is building into the budget significantly higher internal charges to all the various departments to cover those costs. These include a lot of transfers that are occurring associated to ARPA, and we should see those numbers coming back down in future budgets. And then this next slide is just to provide a 5-year comparison. Again, balances were relatively flat for most years, and then we saw the uptick with the current fiscal year and then for the proposed budget. And again, I point directly to ARPA. That's why it was important to call it out. You're going to hear this. You're probably going to get tired of hearing me say ARPA, and maybe I'll come up with something new to call it later in the week just to freshen it up. So, but I think what's really important is when you look at these 5-year averages, you can see that, like, if you look at the property taxes in particular, you can see it's been increasing each year, but it's not a substantial increase. Intergovernmental agreements, same thing, slight increase, but other than the ARPA and CARES Act and some of those one-time funds that came into the county, it's been a slow increase. Same thing with fees and charges. The reason I call that out is when you're talking about sustainability for operations and the services that we provide, that it's really important to keep note that a lot of our materials and services cost, and I'll get into more detail later on some future slides, whether or not our revenues are keeping pace with our spending. And the downside would be as if we're outpacing with our expenditures more than our revenue streams, then we have those, for lack of a better term, an uh-oh moment that then we have to sharpen some pencils and figure out how we're going to continue to deliver services and where we may need to cut in future fiscal years to match where our current revenues are.
So Ken, on that last piece, the internal charges,
Yeah.
how it went up
Mm-hmm.
pretty high, is that ARPA too? or is-
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, those internal charges, because it's how we build the budget, because we don't code expenses directly to Fund 32. So it requires the ability to transfer the funds from, as an example, you transfer funds from Fund 32 to Fund 16 to HHS.
Okay.
So then HHS can appropriate those funds and spend those funds.
Okay.
So a lot of those internal charges that you're seeing, it's really being influenced by those charges. And also it's the Fund 32 is, we treat that as an internal service because we manage that.
Okay.
Even though it's not really an internal service, it's a special revenue fund that's part of insurance reserve and a lot of, it's just how we categorize it for the budget.
Okay, thank you.
So again, and I think the biggest thing that stands out on this graph here is you can see from 1920, you can see that, we were seeing revenues trending up. A lot of that is Health and Human Services in particular. I mean, that's a department that over the last 10 years has expanded, quite substantially. I've been with Yamhill County for going on 18 years now. And I think when I started with the county, Health and Human Services may have been just over 100 employees, and right now 340 or 340 FTEs. And so with all that growth, the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid funding, eligibility, and I'll let Lindsay go into more detail on those areas. But again, we saw significant growth. At the same time, we've also seen growth in other areas and programs and escalated costs and the services that we deliver, and pursuing grants and IGAs and so that's what you're going to see. And then you look at 2021 and all of a sudden there was this jump, and that's 2021 is where we received the first, because it actually happened in May of 2021, which was during that fiscal year when we received the first ARPA allocation. But also during that year, we also received a lot of CARES Act funds that also came into the budget. So you'll see that it jumped up. And then for 21-22, the current fiscal year at 179, and then what we have forecasted for revenues is going to be in that 189. But again, once we start spending down these one-time funds, I'm anticipating that this graph is going to, when I'm presenting this budget next year, it's going to look a lot different when we're presenting the 23-24 budget, that you're going to see. We're going to be trending the other direction. So the next part of my presentation I'm going to go over is the discretionary revenue, and more specifically, it's also known as the general fund. Here, with our team, you're going to hear us refer to it a lot as discretionary revenue. Other jurisdictions call it their general fund. Again, these are discretionary revenues that we can use it on any service. There's no strings attached. There's no restrictions, unlike Medicaid funds or state grant and aid or some of these other intergovernmental agreements. Those are all restricted funds. We can use it for this specific purpose. That's the reason we receive these funds. So when we get into discretionary revenue, again, you can see the numbers, and what's really discretionary is about 19% of our total revenue. I know the first question is, well, the property taxes on the other one. Well, this also includes more than just property taxes. We have other fees and other services or other revenues that we receive that are also rolled into this amount that are discretionary in nature. It's really subject to the budget adoption process and then the Board of Commissioners on how those funds are spent. So you can see the difference in, it's just to provide a 10-year snapshot, or actually a 20-year snapshot. If you look back in 02-03, our 27% of our total revenues were discretionary, and we're right around 19% now.
Does that involve ARPA? How does ARPA play into that 22, 23?
ARPA is included.
Okay, so discretionary might actually be lower than 19%?
Correct.
There's
Okay.
4.4 million of ARPA dollars in that 36.
Correct.
Okay.
36.6 million.
I will show more because there's more details later on that breaks down what's all in the discretionary,
Okay, thank you.
which is the next slide. All right, so the general fund, and when we get into presentations later, when this is Fund 10002, is the primary fund that we collect our property taxes and all of the other taxes that feed into that fund. You can see that we have in 1002, the beginning balance, we have that at 4.4 million, which is both addition to planned reserve for the future, but then also we try to do our best to project what the property taxes are going to look like. And sometimes it comes in higher, there's settlements, there's other things that come in and it boosts that number. And then we carry that forward in the beginning balance and we make sure we include that it's available for distribution. The current year taxes, you can see that just almost 26 million in property taxes. We have prior year taxes. That's a placeholder. We usually budget that. That's to take in for any appeals or with the assessor's office if they're working through a tax case and we receive those funds. We want to make sure that we have some level of appropriation that's built into the budget. You'll see we have O&C funds. We put a placeholder in this every year. We don't know what that's going to look like or if we're going to receive O&C funds, but we always try to make sure we appropriate. That's really subject to federal legislation and if the county does in fact receive it.
I just wanted to note, I was reading ahead as it were. And I know that the 1920 and 2021 both have actuals of 65,000. Is that a mistake or is that actually what came in?
Well, if it's an actual, it means we actually
I
received
know,
it.
and I just mean that just because then the next year is the budget was adopted. We haven't received any.
Right.
I wonder whether it's
Yeah, and we can go into more detail when we go
I didn't
over
wanna
Fund
get too technical. I
1002.
wanted to remember that.
Yeah. Okay.
So Ken, video lottery dollars are not called out specifically.
No, that's the, so video lottery is not in this fund. Video lottery goes straight into Fund 26, which is economic development.
I'm sorry, so this is just, okay.
So you have the amusement tax, which is 16,000. Those are lottery funds that come in. And so, but most of the video lottery that I think you're looking for, that goes directly into Fund 26. And then you have the cigarette tax, liquor tax, marijuana tax. These are ones that we've been seeing. The cigarette tax has been going on the decline. We've been watching that each year. Alcohol tax, we've been watching that climb. And then the marijuana tax is one that it's a challenge. That's a new one that went into effect several years ago. It really hasn't stabilized. And then there's also a lot of that's subject to the state legislature as well. They've been applying some changes, changing formula, so that one is our best guess, looking at a combination of looking at in previous years and then trying to project forward. That's a best guess that we build in. And then you'll see pool and bond interest, and we can go into more detail about that. But we are, the revenues associated to our pool and bond interest, just like everything else, we're watching the economic conditions. That's been down. So we're not, when you look at the revenues, we're trending the wrong direction, but then that's a direct, indication of the current economic conditions right now. And then you'll see ARPA that's built in here, the 4.4 million. I'll get into more detail when I present Fund 32 and 1002 about the purpose of those funds and how we're transferring that in. And then this last one is the transfer from solid waste, which is 89,000. That's another one that's kind of in this holding pattern that's going to be going away with the current status of Riverbend landfill. We've always taken funds, and I'll go into more detail later when Ken Friday does his presentation for the solid waste fund. And when I talk about the landfill license agreement, we'll get into more detail. But it's anticipated that this 89,000 is either going to be substantially decreased or is going to be coming off the books into the future. So in total, that gives us 36 million, just over 36 million for funds on what we call discretionary and what we make available for the various Fund 10 departments.
So if you back out ARPA, you're looking at about 17.5% for discretionary. So that's, based on compared to 2002 and 3, that's about 10 percentage points down. And that could mostly be attributed to a decrease in which funds specific, which revenue streams specifically.
Well, it's a couple things. There's a couple moving pieces when it comes to those moving percentages. One, it's you could have the increases and decreases with the other lesser taxes that are coming in. You see the liquor tax is trending up, you see the tobacco tax is trending down. You also have the one cautionary tale that I always have with every department is when you're looking at beginning balances. Most of your beginning balances that we have are based on a one-time savings that occurred that fiscal year. And so what you're going to see is we're using quite a bit of the beginning balance, but once we start to use that and we're not carrying balances forward the next year, then you're going to see that number get even smaller. Again, that's from one-time savings. So that's why it's a cautionary that anytime we're relying on balances in order to balance our budget, you know, at some point we're going to spend those balances down and we're going to be in a position to where you're either going to have to find a new way to increase additional revenues or you're going to have to cut expenditures to balance. So the next part, and I realized I did not hand it out. For one moment.
Does Doreen have all these?
I will make sure she gets
Oh, okay.
copies of all of it.
It's actually really.
Can you hear me yet?
Oh, the big sheets.
I mean, the big sheets with a little print. Is another one.
And Doreen, I'll make sure you get copies of all of it. All right, so I'm hearing. Oh, it's not static. It's like, all right, so what I just handed out is a discretionary allocation table, and this is the table that the budget team and I use in tracking and monitoring the discretionary allocation, and it'll help with this slide make a little bit more sense. Guess I should have a copy for myself too. So the important things that I would just highlight here is our allocation. Again, we talked about that 36 million that we have available for general fund monies. And what this slide shows is the current fiscal year for 21-22. You can see how those funds were allocated. 69% to criminal justice. And of the criminal justice, you know, I want to say 55 or it may be close to 60% of that 69% is for the sheriff's office and and the sheriff's programs and the various divisions. You can see that Health and Human Services, like I mentioned before, you kind of remember looking back at the other slide where you see how large the Health and Human Services is in relation to the total budget, but then you'll see that only 6.7% of the general fund goes to Health and Human Services. 16% for general government, that includes everything from admin to the clerk's office to the assessor's office. You know, that's our general, what falls into that general government category. And then the internal services, and again, you'll see the 5.4%, that 1.5 million that goes to like insurance reserve, capital reserve funds like that. So that's the current fiscal year. Now looking at 22-23, it's basically the same, but here's where you start seeing that ARPA influence because the internal services has gotten larger because there's some specific transfers that we're looking to make for some capital expenditures using ARPA funds. So now all of a sudden that went to 10.6%. And really it's the funds that we're going to be proposing to transfer that's coming from Fund 32 ARPA into 1002 discretionary and then being allocated to one of the internal services department. Most notably is Fund 40, which is capital reserve. As a result, that changed the allocation. Criminal justice, it still represents the largest slice at 65% of the allocation. But if you take ARPA out of that, it's still pretty consistent that criminal justice is going to be close to 69-70% of the general fund monies. So the sheet that you have before you, the big spreadsheet, and sorry, us budget nerds, we love spreadsheets. So bear with me. This is going to show the exercise, and you can see the various columns and how it's been updated. This was the exercise that the Board of Commissioners went through in December in determining the discretionary allocation that goes out to departments. Most departments saw a 6% increase to their discretionary allocation. And that's really because we're seeing increased personnel costs, increased fuel costs. You know, there's just increased costs across the board in order to deliver services. And so you'll see the breakdown and the percentages that are built into this just in more detail on this discretionary allocation. As we go through the budget budget presentations and we get to Wednesday for deliberations, and you start looking at the various requests that you're going to hear throughout this week, anything that's approved for discretionary funds will be updated on this table, so then we can update the total discretionary amount, what's been approved, and what add back requests have been approved for departments. So then that way we're able to track our general fund monies that are going out to the departments. Any questions on that? There's a lot to it, and this spreadsheet is not the easiest to read. And, you know, I look at it several times a day, so I'll admit that it's a little easier for me to look at. But again, it'll show you the percentages. It'll show you what's been approved thus far as changes. You can, if you go through each column, and then at the end, you can kind of see what those numbers are going to look like. And I'll be able to provide more detail on Wednesday when we go through deliberations on what those numbers are going to look like as well.
You know, I had a number of questions about, and I know that they're coming up, so.
All right. So this next field just shows a 10, 11-year, what the allocation of discretionary revenues looks like. And again, you can see that over the last 10 years, criminal justice have had a lot of increases that have been approved, and where most of the other categories have stayed pretty flat. The one I would call out is on the internal services. Again, that's that ARPA influence, but that should go back down in future years. But for most of the other categories, it stayed relatively flat. So the other important thing that I would add is the exercise that we go through on the discretionary is really to give those departments, especially those that rely on the general fund monies to balance their budget. This gives them an idea. That's why we approved their allocation in December. So then they have that building block that then they can start looking at their other revenues, but at least they know what to record in that line as a revenue to balance to. Then they build their other revenues, then they can start building their expenditure categories for personnel, materials and services and capital that they need to ensure that we present a balanced budget. But this is going to be another, you know, it gets really competitive. You know, there's a lot of discussions around the use of general fund money. Like I said before, the easiest way to look at it, we have a $189 million total budget that's proposed. 36 million of that is discretionary funds. So, and they're not never ending. You know, we're trending certain directions, but again, we have to be very frugal in how we use those funds and very deliberate when we're looking at funding requests. And there is going to be a number of add back requests and funding requests that is going to be coming before the committee all throughout this week. So it's just something, again, just to kind of take a look at, and you can see the trends. You know, there may need to be further discussions about other revenue sources. It's discussions that we're having all the time on what's available, and how we continue to deliver services if our costs are outpacing our revenues. So the next few slides, I'm going to quickly and kind of doing a time check. I know I'm running a little slow, so I'm going to try to pick it up a little bit because I'm cutting into Director Manfred's time. So major expense categories for 21-22, you can see that 41% of our total costs were related to personnel, 37% were materials and services, and then you can see some of the other categories that are in here. But again, it's really driven, you know, we're a service provider, so it's going to be personnel and materials and services spent to support those programs. And it's going to look basically the same in what we have proposed for this fiscal year. Again, you're going to see an increase in personnel. The only thing that I would just highlight that when you start seeing increases in personnel costs, it's not necessarily that it's wages or it's benefits or it's, you know, there's also, if we're adding FTEs, if, you know, there's a lot of things that go into that. So there is wages, there is benefits that are all factored in the personnel costs, but then it's also FTEs, because if we're adding another 25, 30 FTEs, you're going to see that number is going to get larger as well. And then this next slide is just a comparison. So you can see, you know, personnel is up, materials and services is slightly down. And in most part, you know, when departments are looking at it, if they're going to be making some, you know, having to balance, they're probably going to be cutting materials and services to offset those increased costs with personnel. And that's, it almost matches the number. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing a lot during the presentations this week. So this is our 10-year expense trend that we're looking at. Again, just like everyone else, every other business or throughout the community, we're seeing that personnel costs continue to climb. But again, I just highlight that we're also in this budget, there's a lot of additional FTEs being added. In particular, I know HHS has quite a few FTEs associated to various programs and grants that are coming in as well, to make sure that we're able to deliver those services. But at the same time, we do have 5 labor unions. We have 2 collective bargaining agreements that are currently in negotiations right now, one with Teamsters, the other one with Parole and Probation. The Teamsters one was a very large contract that we're still absorbing a lot of cost increases that were part of that last collective bargaining agreement. And next spring, we anticipate that we'll be bargaining with the other 3 unions that will be opening contract negotiations during the spring of 23. So, yeah, so we continue to see personnel costs going up. Again, we have to, you know, we need to make sure that we have the sufficient resources, sufficient staff, and the professional staff to deliver all the critical services that we deliver. At the same time, we also need to keep an eye on our revenue streams, and because at a certain point, that if our personnel costs or our costs of doing business are exceeding our revenues, we're going to have to make some adjustments going forward. So this slide, this is a new one for this year. I don't think I've included this one before. This is a 10-year revenue to expense. So if you look at the dash line, that's what the revenues are doing. And then the solid line. And I'd call out the colors, but full disclaimer, I'm colorblind. So it just makes me, putting together these slides even that much more fun.
Dash line, solid line.
Correct.
Got it.
So-
Accessibility at its core. Right?
So you're going to see that, you can see what the trends are looking like as far as our revenue to expenses over the last 10 years. All right, and so the next slides, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. This is our historic budget to actual. And the one thing that I just want to highlight is when you're looking at the budget document, and just a reminder that the proposed budget, that all of the revenues and expenditures are projections. And there's going to be things, you're going to hear things like placeholders for potential grants. So there may be a placeholder for a revenue and an expense line because we have to build a balanced budget. And so a lot of departments will build placeholders because they think they're going to be applying for grants, or they receive a lot of grants over the years. And so they need to make sure that they budget for both that revenue and the expenditure, because per Oregon budget law, if we don't have the funds appropriated, we can't spend it. We can take in all the revenue we like, but if we don't budget enough expenditure authority within the budget, we can't legally spend it during the budget year. So that's something really important, that typically when we approach the budget, when we're looking at revenues, we try to be conservative and try to get as close and maybe, project our revenues a little less than anticipated. But then expenditures, we want to make sure we have sufficient appropriation authority that should the funds be available and a grant comes available, or that we have those funds available. So we tend to project our expenses a little bit higher. So budget revenues low, very conservatively, and then aim a little bit higher, but making sure that we still have to present a balanced budget.
And I guess one thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was thinking for maybe for Jason at least, is that it's very close, and then we're trying to be conservative, so blue is higher than red, and then you get to 2020, 2021, and pandemic, right? And so HHS and general fund both got a lot of money that went out the door for services.
Correct.
I was just noting that it looks really
I figured that's what
like
it
a
was.
big
Yeah.
difference, because we didn't have a budget.
So this is one that you can see that, we're pretty close. And just like Commissioner Kula was saying, the one part that for 1920 and 2021, we actually received more than what we had budgeted, because ARPA, CARES Act, a lot of these funds became available, that the state was rolling out revenues that were coming into the county. The federal government did as well, and it ended up coming in higher. And so anytime that you see those revenues that come in higher than what was budgeted, that's where it's going to influence the beginning balances as well. So because unless we have full appropriation, we can't spend those funds. And so sometimes we may have to do, if we really need to make the funds available, we may have to do a supplemental budget, or we may have to take some additional action to make those funds, but it's really limited on what we can do. That's why it's really important that the budget team and all the departments, we have to be very accurate as we're building these budgets, because we need to make sure that we have sufficient appropriation authority in order to continue to deliver services. If we reach a point and we under project and we don't have the funds available to spend, we can't spend that money. And so it just goes into the balances. And then we'd have to wait until July 1st of the following year in order to access those funds. So again, when you're looking at personnel, you can see the departments do a really nice job. We keep it pretty close. You can see that, I like to see the budget number always be a little bit higher than the actual to have a little bit of that buffer. But you can see that a lot of times when it comes to personnel, we're pretty close. So when you're looking at those personnel numbers that you're going to be seeing over the next 3 days, you're seeing that we're hitting the mark pretty close on what we're projecting on actual costs. Materials and services, this is one to where you're going to see it look a little bit different. There's going to be more of a gap, again, where you're going to see budgeted numbers are going to be higher than the actual expenditures. Again, that is thanks to a lot of departments that they're budgeting for it, but they're being conservative in their spending habits. They're really looking at, do we really need to spend this? Can I realize some cost savings to make sure that I have some beginning balance, to make sure that I can operate next year? So I like it when we see a little bit of a gap there, but I would also highlight that a lot of these funds, something like insurance reserve, when we get into Fund 80 and we talk about insurance reserve, you're going to see that we appropriate a pretty large amount for liability claims because we need to make sure that we have the funds available should the county end up in a legal situation, or we need to make sure that we have sufficient funds appropriated. So then that way we're not having to take from other departments to pay that. So you'll see some funds where we appropriate a pretty large amount and hopefully we don't spend it. But we have to make sure that we have it fully appropriated. But that's a good example of one that I really hope we don't spend a penny of it. But in order to manage risk and make sure the county's in a solid footing, we need to make sure it's fully appropriated. So you'll see that I always like to close that gap up a little bit more, but just keeping in mind that I think departments do a really good job. And just know that when you're looking at those numbers, there's not a lot of fluff that's built in, to the budgets. That what they've identified and built into those budgets is what we need to operate next year. Hopefully, if they realize cost savings, or if they find out that it's not needed right now, that they could realize those savings, and then that would be into the balance and help us build budgets for each fiscal year. So this next slide, this is our audited beginning balances, or audited ending balances each year. This is an exercise in order for us to build budgets each year. We need to know what those audited ending balances look like. And Mike Barnhart and his team are the ones who, working with the auditors, that come up with these numbers, they post these numbers, and then this is used to project our beginning balances for 22-23. You have to have that starting point. So again, you're going to see that you can look at that trend. You can see years to where we've had to spend into balances. Again, you look at that 2009, 2010. Again, that was the housing recession back in that time. So revenues were down, so we were having to spend into reserves. So we had less balance, beginning balances for that year. And then you can see that we've had some good years where we were trending up to where balance numbers were looking really good. And 2021, again, ARPA and some of the CARES Act, and where we got reimbursement for some of our costs. Now we have a small spike in our beginning balances as a result of that. And I anticipate that in future years, that number is going to come down quite a bit because with the current costs, and you're going to hear more about it this week, whether it's fuel, materials, services, computers, personnel costs, et cetera, everything's on the increase. And one of the first things that we always have to spend down first is we start spending those balances down, because that's going to offset, the 1 year cost. So that number, again, we had a lot of good years where we were underspending in a lot of categories and we're able to build up some reserves. And I'm projecting that once ARPA's out of here and then we continue to, the way the current economy is right now, we're going to be trending the other direction to where I think we're going to be. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. As I joke all the time, my crystal ball's on order with Amazon and it's stuck on a container ship out on the ocean. So I don't know how much we're going to start eating into our balances and reserves in order to build a budget, because there's a lot of moving pieces, because we first have to look at our spending habits. So if revenues are trending down, the first thing we have to do is start looking at our spending, where we can realize cost savings that's built into that, where we might be able to find other opportunities to backfill lost revenues. So there's a lot of things that come into play with that.
So Ken, on that chart,
Mhm.
the recessionary period from 5 to 2010. Is it accurate to say that we spent down our ending balances to the tune of about $9 million to cover kind of basic personnel services?
Well, one with the disclaimer, in 2009, I was in a completely different role. I was
Okay.
working for the county, but I was in a different role at that time. But I can speak that at the time I was a division manager, and looking at it, that when 2009, 2010, 2011, all the departments throughout the county experienced, we had to make cuts. We were spending into balances that maybe historically we were underspending. Well, we were spending it that year because revenues were down. I know we also, in the department I was in, we had layoffs that year. So that was a different time. And so I'm just looking at the numbers because, again, like I said, I was in a different role at this time. So, we were having to spend into balances, and it was due to the economic conditions at that time. Am I anticipating that we're going to be down? It was different times, different revenues. I'd also point out 2009 HHS was a lot smaller. All the departments, the county as a whole was much smaller
Sure.
as far as FTEs and the services compared to what it is today in this budget.
Okay,
So
thank you.
So again, 21, 22 beginning balances. And the reason I don't have 22, 23 is because we're still building that budget. So, we're able to project that because we did our audits. We have the ending balances from 2021 that shows this. And you can see what this shows is the difference between budgeted and audited. All right, so the next series of slides, and I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly because I realize I'm over on time, is the next one. For each year, we show a comparison with comparable counties. So for the next few slides, I'm going to show comparison data for Lynn, Douglas, Benton, Josephine, Polk, Umatilla, Klamath, Coos, Columbia, and Lincoln County. All these counties are comparable in size. And this is who we've used for our comparable counties for quite a number of years. So jumping ahead here, getting to my notes. So not a lot has changed from the previous year. Based on the Portland State figures that we receive, we're seeing a 27% change in growth for Yamhill County from 2020 to 2021. Polk County is still has the highest rate of growth for that time at 33%, but again, we're not that far behind. So this is looking back, this is 20 years of population growth, and you can see that we're third over that time with just Polk actually has the highest percentage, but the way this is sorted, it's really showing the population size. So you can see that Lynn and Douglas are still larger than Yamhill County comes at third. This next slide is the per capita revenue and expense. And so you have the one field, the light green, I think it is the revenue, or yellow. It looks yellow to me. All right. And then green is revenue. So again, when you look at the per capita revenue and expense, we're fourth lowest in expenditure and fourth lowest in revenue per capita. And we remain at fourth, same as last year. So really no change with that. And again, this is another slide to show, this is to demonstrate the difference between revenue and expense. I like to be on the positive side, which I'm pleased to report that Yamhill County is on the positive side. You know I get questions each year because when you look at Coos County and Polk County, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're spending more than their revenues. It means that they may be spending into their balances. They may have reserves. Again, these are audited numbers, not budget numbers. So it looks a little bit different, but they are obviously, like Polk County is having to come up with $9.7 million in order to meet their, you know, they're spending more than their revenues. So, and again, there's a lot of other figures that I could probably throw it to Mike Barnhart, and he could probably speak more into the accounting talk on the audits and the because this also includes liabilities and things like that. So, but I'm pleased to report that we're on the upside, and I like showing that our revenues, our difference is above the line and not below. That means that we're in a good position. So again, just looking ahead, and my apologies for running through that, but I realize I'm over on time. Just some things kind of looking forward to the next fiscal year in general, but then also something to keep an eye on when you start hearing presentations. Increased demands on discretionary revenues. Again, we're going to see a number of requests coming forward this week. I think we're in a good position to really look at those funds, but keep in mind both one-time requests versus ongoing operational costs are not without its challenge. Long-term county facility needs and courthouse. This is something that the county has been engaged with for the last year. We're working with an outside architecture firm. The county is bursting at the seams and dealing with a lot of operational and maintenance costs as a result of our campus buildings. And so that's going to be something that's going to be some long-term discussions moving forward. We're currently wrapping up a strategic capital plan right now with the board, and we're going to be hopefully charting out a plan and figuring out a funding mechanism in order to start delivering on that plan. The finance system replacement, this is something that we've been involved with for 2 years, and we're anticipating we're going to be going live at the end of June with our new financial system for the first elements. It's something that Mike and his team have been instrumental and in the middle of making that effort. Again, we're replacing our central nervous system by updating a financial system that we've had in place since 1996 with a new system. So it's not without its challenges, and it's a huge project. And the first go live is end of June for the financial portion of it. And then we have other components, including the budget module, which will be happening later in the year. The one thing I'm pleased to say, this is my last year using GEMS to build a budget, and I can't wait to use the new system. ARPA, I've talked about that at length. There's going to be a lot of discussions around that. Increasing personnel costs, increasing costs for materials and services due to economic conditions. Fuel costs alone is something that when Public Works comes and does their presentation, they have some updates or changes that they're going to be talking specifically to fuel costs. Reserves and balances, it's something I'm always keeping an eye on to make sure that, you know, that we have sufficient resources to deal with any emergency or revenue issues into the future to make sure that we're on a stable footing moving forward. Increased demand for services. This is another big one that as a result of the pandemic, all through it, we've seen an increase in demand for services. And I think you're going to hear that a lot for health and human services, whether it's mental health or crisis services, there's an increased demand for that. Law enforcement, we've seen an increase in the services that they're providing. There's a backlog with court cases where the DA's office has a backlog on cases. You're going to see some requests coming from the DA's office to deal with that. So we're seeing a demand for increased services across the board. Recruiting and retention, this is another one, just like every other employer in the nation, we're having the same struggles about being able to recruit and retain the top-notch employees. It's not without its challenges. And, we've seen a little bit of improvement in responses to recruitments, but again, it's a very, very competitive market right now, and trying to make sure that, we can budget all the FTEs in the world, but if we can't fill those positions, then it has an impact to the services that we're delivering. So it's something that we're really working hard on and keeping a close eye on. Risk and insurance reserves. Again, we've had some in the past, some pretty significant claims that are having an impact down the road on insurance renewals. And when Justin and I present Fund 80 and the insurance reserve, we can provide more details on what we're looking at for renewals and what we're having to budget for insurance. So again, the insurance market is also having a lot of challenges, both pandemic related and then also experience with some of the past claims that we've had over the years. So we're seeing some increases there. And then we're also looking at legislative changes. There's a lot of legislative changes that are coming down that are changing how we deliver services. In particular, you're going to hear from community corrections about a lot of changes about how they supervise parole and probation offenders. And there's just a lot of changes that came from the legislature, and we're trying to navigate that. So anytime that we start seeing changes there, it has that effect where we have to figure out how we're going to deliver those services based on the new rules. This slide, we always include this. It goes way back, but this is what the current PERS rates. I know PERS is in the past has been a hot topic for discussion and a lot of questions about it. We continue to see the rates are going up, and here's what they look like for the current biennium.
So our share of PERS has virtually doubled in 4 years.
Well, but keep in mind that we've seen the percentage increase on the PERS rate, but it's not that the rates may have increased, because then because it's based on the salary. So if you have increases in salary, that's also going to have an impact. So there's multiple inputs that come in, but correct, what we were spending on retirement has almost doubled, but it's part of it's PERS and the contributions. Some of it's collective bargaining. Some of it is wage increases that have been approved over the years. All that has a factor that plays into what we actually pay in the PERS total costs.
Okay. And then did you have projected 22, 23? Am I missing that?
No, I didn't have that number. I was trying to provide more accurate numbers, so I didn't include the 22, 23.
Okay. But the reserve has remained pretty steady, the amount, right?
Yeah, that PERS reserve is a fund that we have set up in Fund 80 that was set aside many years ago by the Board of Commissioners. And we've been historically, we transferred funds. We haven't been transferring funds into that PERS reserve for quite some time, but that is available in the PERS reserve, that if the costs continue, that's available, that we could transfer out to departments to offset those retirement costs. But at this point, we haven't taken any action or done anything with that PERS reserve. Other than use it for some interfund loans. And so there's some revenue that's coming in that's replenishing that. So that's available, and that's a plus side. That is something that's one of those reserve lines that I'm pleased that we have built into the budget, because if it does reach a point that, it's a resource that we could transfer back to departments to help offset rising personnel costs and being able to close that gap on any funding gaps that may occur within a department.
Great.
So the good news, like I said, I went into detail about the retirement reserve. We do have some good things in the insurance reserves, and we still continue to realize the benefits of moving our workers' comp carrier to SAFE. That was a substantial cost savings, but then our experience is really good, and that's really thanks to the departments and employees doing a good job of keeping our claims low. And so that's trending in a positive direction. Again, all the departments in the county, conservative budgeting and fiscal management, we're very deliberate in how we build this budget. And we don't take it lightly that this is the public's funds. And so when we're spending these funds, even though we have a $189 million budget, I like seeing ending balances because that means we're being frugal and we're doing an analysis and determining, what we need to have versus what we want to have, but we're making sure we're spending the money on the needs, not the wants. So we have outstanding hands-on working managers. Again, I can't say this enough. We have outstanding employees throughout the county that have not only helped, just looking at the short term, the last 3 years and all the declared emergencies and going through the pandemic, we have an outstanding team that has weathered that storm and continued to deliver the services and have done an outstanding job. And I can't thank our employees enough. That's an understatement, and they're doing a great job. And then the other good news is the ARPA investments and grants, with what has been set up as a policy-wise as the priorities for those funds, making a lot of long-term investments to help out many areas of need, whether that's in the nonprofit world or if it's water and sewer infrastructure or investments into public health. The path that's being charted, it's unprecedented that we have this $21 million in making this investment for making some positive change into the future and some long-term positive benefits. And that's it. That's my budget overview. So I just want to thank again, in particular, I want to thank the budget team, Mike Barnhart, our finance manager, Justin Hogue, my deputy. I also want to thank Megan and Carolina, who are going to be helping to take care of us all this week, and they keep me in line because I forget a lot of stuff and they give me a lot of great reminders, but thank you very much. I also want to thank all the departments. They're going to be coming in and presenting to you over the next 3 days. And again, like I said at the beginning, I want to thank, the budget committee for dedicating your time to helping us accomplish this very important task in adopting our budget so we can continue to operate come July 1. So thank you. Any
Thank you,
questions?
Thank you, Ken. Great job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We want to take a quick break, or do we want to move into Director Management? 5-minute breaks. Sounds good. Thank you, Ken. Each year I'm reminded and pleasantly reminded of how competent you guys are. I only get to sit in here once a year, and every year I come back and I'm like, man, you guys do a great job. And to be able to understand it and present it in a way it's very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can anyone hear me?
Seem to matter.
Hello, Carolina. Can you hear me? Doreen, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't think anyone can hear me.
Yeah, I think we can hear each other now, Doreen. It's interesting. Yeah, so,
Okay, something is, so here's what I tried. I left my computer audio and I went to the call in and that still muted me. And so it's not just my computer, but also my connection in Zoom on telephone that seems to be muted. One of the things I did notice, so all of my settings, even in my deeper settings in my computer, all of my audio receptors are on. My microphone is allowing, my computer's allowing access to my microphone by every app I can click. But it says there's one person that can mute me, and that's Carrie Hinton. And that's, I don't see her on my list of participants.
yeah. I think, Doreen, this indicates to me that the issue's in room 32, because we can hear each other, they can't hear us. Something's not right.
I think someone else has a mute setting in place.
Yeah, normally when this happens, it's because they haven't selected Stream PC as.
Hey,
as
Shane,
the-
sorry, we can hear you guys.
Oh, can you? Oh, lovely.
Yeah,
We hear whole conversation and we're live.
yeah.
So Doreen, we can hear you now. It's all
Yeah.
working.
Yeah,
Well, this is exceptional.
Doreen and I fixed
So,
it.
what I did was I hit stream PC and audio again.
Oh, nice.
But the rest of the audio has been working fine in the room, so I don't know why it was not working for her in particular.
Okay, no
But-
worries, we'll take it.
So that's all that matters.
Yeah, that's usually the cause. So thanks for doing that
Thank
again,
you.
Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
Good luck, Doreen. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for
Bye.
your patience.
A little bit, yeah. More so than normal.
It's cold in here, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I suppose it's
cold.
better than hot though.
We turned it in. But
Yeah.
This room can warm up very quickly.
I just realized Lindsay has a black and white vest.
Yeah, we got the memo.
The
I'm glad we
bathroom.
all, we made the right decision, the black and white pattern, for sure. That's right. It's for Ken.
Thank you.
Jason is not, and neither is
All right, are we ready to resume then?
Yes.
Or- oh, yeah.
Are you cold?
Oh, it was colder.
We can jump in.
Nice cold.
Are we waiting for Justin?
I heard we're gonna get going.
Oh,
All right, let's resume 22, 23. We will start the day with Director Lindsay.
Welcome.
And where we're gonna start is you'll see a health and HHS tab in the budget binder. And so that's where we'll be kicking off.
Well, good morning, everyone. Since we do have a new budget member, I'll just let you know, my name's Lindsay Manfred and I'm the Health and Human Services Director and Public Health Administrator. I've been in this role since February of 2020. And, but before that, I've been with the county for 15 years in various roles, first as a nurse in public health, and then before I became the director, was the deputy director for a handful of years. And with me, I've got Christina Ferguson, who is our Administrative Services Director, does a number of many important things for HHS, including oversee our budget. And then I have Jason Hennis as well, and he's our Behavioral Health Director. Okay. Well, similar to how we've done this in years past, I'm going to start with some key administrative and fiscal changes that happened in the 2021-2022 budget, things that we're anticipating in the 22-23 budget. And we'll go through each division specifically, and then wrap up with some threats and some pretty exciting opportunities before us as well. You do have a packet with various items in there, and I will just refer to them as we get to them in the presentation. So a couple of things, just a reminder, and I know Ken touched on this, but 96% of the Health and Human Services budget is actually state and federal grants, with the other 4% being the county discretionary or general fund. Out of that 96%, 3/4 of that is Medicaid dollars that are restricted to the use of medically necessary behavioral health services. Several things happened in the 2021 and the 2022 legislative sessions that impacted our budget. Those things include the public health modernization, certified community behavioral health clinics, mobile crisis investments, behavioral health housing investments, and the behavioral health resource networks, more readily known as the Measure 110 dollars. So all of those things had pretty significant impacts in our budget this year. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those as we go through them and it comes up. A variety of our programs are under the CCOs, the Coordinated Care Organizations, global budget, which is our local 501c3 Yamhill Community Care. As a reminder, in 2021, January 2021, the CCO took back the risk for the behavioral health network. And then in 2022, they took back the oversight of the behavioral health network and administrative functions. However, HHS does still maintain funding and FTE to support care coordination of Yamhill Community Care members in our role as a local mental health authority and community mental health program. Those are in addition to, of course, the general contract for service delivery that we also have with them. Our 2021 adopt budget included plans to spend $7.2 million of carryover, but due to workforce challenges that I think many people are aware of, and the subsequent vacancy savings, we actually only spent $500,000 of those dollars. We anticipate 2021-2022 ending with $10.8 million. This $10.8 million is restricted funds, largely in Medicaid and public health, and much of it has a planned multi-year strategy to use. Our 2022 budget strategy, we're going to be using we anticipate using about 5.6 million this year of fund balance, largely covering the costs of our collective bargaining agreement that was last used in the areas that we were required to supplement the funds to make sure that we could cover those costs. Out of that 5.6 million, 677,000 is in public health, 800,000 is in supported housing rental assistance in our transitional treatment and recovery home programs. 700,000 is in mental health outpatient, 447,000 in our adult crisis programs, 330,000 in our peer assisted crisis program, 324,000 our OASIS program, 520,000 in our family and youth programs, which also include our school services that are delivered on site in partnership with those schools. The changes to personnel costs, including medical, PERS, and CBA adjustments, resulted in a 12% increase in salaries and an 18% increase in budgeted benefit costs over the 21 and 22 fiscal year, resulted in about $4 million that we needed to absorb. We had approximately 50% of our variable revenue was decreased during the pandemic largely related to COVID, and just service delivery looked different, changed our ability to bill for some of those services. And so that 50% reduction in variable revenue loss is largely in Oregon Health Plan open card, as well as private insurance pay. We do anticipate that that will be a one-time thing. And as we're seeing services begin to pick back up, people beginning to come back into care, we expect that variable revenue to return back to our pre-pandemic state. Oregon Health Plan membership has increased in 2021 due to a couple of things. OHA waived the requirement to limit each CCO's enrollment, and that waiver has been extended. And so while Yamhill Community Care was originally capped at 28,778 members, that waiver allowed them to increase, and the current membership is 32,335. We've used the Oregon Health Authority's regional fall 2021 data to forecast membership rate groups as accurately and currently as we possibly can. Those models suggest a really conservative overall flat membership, which is what you'll see if you look at item A in your packet. We will, of course, be reevaluating this as we go further into spring and fall and making any adjustments as needed. The 2021 now budget includes 341.34 FTE. This includes 13 added mid-year positions that went through the typical mid-year process and received approval from our Board of Commissioners. We have 342.62 FTE in the 22-23 Commissioners budget, but this does not include those mid-year changes. So the total adjusted would be based on the mid-year changes would actually be 355.62. And the reason for that is, as Ken went through the budget process, right, and we build that budget in January, we had some pretty significant additions that came between that budget build and where we are today. And so it's just the timelines don't line up very well. So you'll see that's why it looks a little bit different. But if you look at items B and C in your packet, you can see explanations for any of the new positions. If there aren't any questions on those, I will jump into the reclassifications and briefly cover those. We have a handful of reclassifications here. One is to reclassify one FTE of an administrative office specialist to program supervisor. It's line 401.25. This is to support increased supervisory responsibilities with our core staff across our behavioral health programs. Reclassify 6 FTE of HS associates, it's 406.20, to HS specialist ones, 406.22, in our enhanced residential and outreach program to support increased responsibilities associated with that enhanced care coordination. Reclass 5 FTE of HS specialist ones to HS specialist 2s due to increased complexity of work in accordance with our intellectual and developmental disabilities programs. Reclassify 1 FTE of program supervisor, line 401.25, to HS specialist, which is 406.23, for greater alignment and complexity across the work of, again, our developmental disabilities programs. We also have 2 reclassifications from an HS specialist 2 to an HS specialist 3. These are individuals who, over the course of the 2021-2022 fiscal year, became eligible for the advanced practitioner role. And so when that happens, we've been giving them lead pay until we can shore this up through the budget process. Just as a reminder, people qualify for the advanced practitioner role when they either become licensed as a qualified mental health therapist in our system and maintain licensure, or become dually credentialed so they're able to provide both behavioral health and substance use disorder treatment. And so this year we had those 2 individuals do that. Our overall operating budget is $48.1 million. This is without the additional expense authority that Ken talked about earlier today. With that, the total budget is 56.5 of expense authority. And again, that just allows us to take part of any opportunities to receive additional funding, whether that be from the state or through different grant processes. Our local and regional community partner contracts have decreased over 2022. This is again related to the changes in our role with Yamhill Community Care, the coordinated care organization. But you can see some of those changes in that in item D in your packet. Welcome. Like any fiscal year, we do anticipate, as we always do, to have different changes and things happen throughout this fiscal year. As those come up, we'll be working closely with county administration and our board of commissioners to go through any processes necessary to make any adjustments there. So before I dive into the division specifics, are there any questions?
I have a
Commissioner Starr.
question. Maybe I'm not, can you, I'm looking at the, our contract with First Step.
Mhm.
We don't have anything 19 or projected through 23. Is that related to CCO in some way picking something up?
I believe they've stopped providing services.
They stopped providing services.
Unfortunately, yes.
Do we have local providers offering alcohol and drug counseling are we utilizing different contracts with private providers locally?
So with the changes with the CCO, any of those contracts directly would be with the CCO.
Okay.
I would say unless there are things that are directly connected to our services. So an example of that is our transitional treatment recovery homes, our TTRS homes, where we actually contract with places like Provoking Hope and even Lutheran Community Services to provide parent coaching. So those are contracts because they're part of one of our programs. But for an organization that would just be providing substance use disorder, outpatient treatment similar to what we do, that would be a contract with the CCO now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the first division is public health. I will say public health experienced quite a bit of mid-year change in 2021, 2022. Largely, those changes fell into two buckets. One is in communicable disease prevention, control, and mitigation. And the other bucket would be public health modernization, which is funding allocated to us through the legislative process and really is there to support things like data analytics, communications, community engagement and connection, and emergency preparedness and response planning. Our variable revenue suggests that restaurant license fees, which is line 321.01, reduced by about $50,000 for 22-23 budget. But we may know that that's going to potentially change. So we're going to keep an eye on that and make any adjustments we need to before we submit the adopt budget. An increase in vital records fees. This is line 321.01 from 103,000 to 118,000. Federal grant from state sources line 331.72 is higher than anticipated in the 21-22 budget due to the increased revenue associated with the communicable disease preparedness and modernization funding that I mentioned a moment ago. Much of this funding is going to be used in a very planful multi-year strategy. And then other funding will be ongoing, things like our STD and HIV funds and modernization funds that have recently come to us. Our client pay services, which is line 346.10, has been adjusted down by 6,000. And our private insurance, line 34611, increased in 2021 due, quite frankly, to the large number of vaccines that we gave. We don't anticipate that to continue, and we think that was isolated, so we left the forecast relatively flat there. And we had some minor adjustments that we are proposing in the public health 22-23 budget. The necessary new FTE was added mid-year in the 2021-22 due to the timing of receiving the new funds. You can see that in item C. And those were for 2 FTE of management analyst positions for our public health modernization work, 1 FTE of management analyst for our public health health educator work, 2 FTE of registered nurses for home visiting services, and 1 FTE of program manager for a dedicated communicable disease supervisor. So this is, this next part here, I will refer to you to item F in your packets. It's one of two general fund requests that we've made. This is the first general fund request that I've made as the director here, but I do think that they are really critical ones. The first is here that shows up in the public health budget is for 0.5 FTE of a management analyst. This is line 401.32 for Yamhill County community suicide prevention efforts. These funds would be matched with state funds to create a full-time suicide prevention coordinator position. Unfortunately, suicide continues to be a significant issue with Oregon having some of the highest rates in the nation. And even though we've seen the rates begin to decrease in Oregon as a whole, they are not decreasing in Yamhill County. We have a robust behavioral health system that provides mental health and substance use disorder treatment, we have amazing crisis services, and we even have really wonderful post-pension services. And we need to have more primary prevention for suicide prevention. We know that there are wonderful strategies that can be used. We need the ability and the capacity to be able to do those. So I ask to please consider this request. Yeah.
If I may, so if everybody's able to track, because we kind of bounced, we were in the budget and what Director Manfred was
Thank
pointing
you.
us back to the memo. And so you'll see on page 2 of the memo is the specific requests that there's 2 requests. And it looks like it's a single memo, but it's not, it's just printed back to back. So, so the memo is there, but we're still on the public health.
We're still in the public health and the budget. Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Which is on page 2.
So the veteran services amount is that pretty consistent from 21, 22? I'm not.
I'm sorry. could
We
you-
haven't got to veterans yet, that section yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're
Yep, still in the public
you're
health
just
budget.
addressing the suicide prevention.
Correct.
Yes,
Okay.
that happens to fall on, would fall. It's not a position budgeted obviously yet, but would fall into the public health budget should it be
Mhm.
awarded. So a couple of other things to note still in the public health budget, line 401.33. The HHS director line shows greater expense than forecasted due to actual hours spent managing the COVID response. As you can imagine, far more of my time was spent doing that than would typically be seen in terms of my allocation across the HHS department. We do anticipate that this shift hopefully will subside and go back to the regular allocation. We're really hoping so. Let's see, in line 406.07, we've got the RN2 line, and it contains 2 FTE of our home visiting nurse time added mid-year, but also includes a change deleting position management authority for 1 FTE RN and adding that FTE back to the HS specialist line, which is 406.22, since we underfilled that position and used the HS spec 1 rather than an RN. Across HHS, we've adjusted our forecasts on incentive pay, which typically we call out of class pay, and bilingual pay, which is line 485, due to changes in staffing at the time of the budget build. We'll refine this again, of course, as we move towards our adopt budget. The cost for overtime, line 481, were held flat rather than increase to anticipated reduction in the need for overtime as we see things shift with the COVID-19 response. And you can see a similar forecast in the extra help line 482. Across HHS and first seen in the public health budget, we've reviewed and adjusted all benefit lines 490 through 499.99 with new rates and based on utilization. Budgeted costs still look high here on the 21-22 utilization because of workforce challenges and a higher than typical vacancy rate. Under materials and services, our drugs and medications, line 512.01, increased in forecast due to additional reproductive health and non-COVID vaccine costs. Our department equipment line 543.01 is high in the 2021-22 due to COVID-related grant funding expenses, which we use for things like our mortality trailer and vaccine distribution tents, things of that nature. The forecast for 22-23 was not adjusted as we do not expect those expenses to carry over and continue. Contract services line 611.02. This is another one of those that comes up across HHS, but just shows up first here in public health. It's for the storage of our digitalized health records. This line also contains Relias, which is the system we use for mandatory training and tracking for our employees. In public health, this line also contains the federal vaccine equity funds that we received in 2021-22. These did not continue for 22-23, so the lines were reduced to reflect that. And you can see the corresponding revenue reduction in 331.72. Schools and conferences, line 612.02 was left flat across HHS. Again, just shows up here in public health first. Despite the decreased cost in 2021, we're hoping that now as we're seeing COVID restrictions loosen, that more of our employees will be taking those opportunities for continuing growth and development through trainings and whatnot that we will likely be in person again. And advertising costs. So that's line 640.01 were also significant in 2021, largely related to publicizing our COVID vaccine events. We do not expect those lines to continue in the next fiscal year. Our other expenses, 699.01 line is used for direct grant-based purchases related to our COVID response. You can see the line is reduced by about $55,000 for the coming year as those costs continue to decrease. Any questions on the public health budget? Okay. All right, well then we will move to our Veterans and Disability Services. So our veterans program has been seeing clients in person again for almost a year. They continue to file claims on behalf of our local veterans and families, collecting over $500,000 consistently each quarter in new benefits for our local veterans. A mini grant from the Oregon Department of Veteran Affairs, ODVA, is funding gas vouchers and bus passes to ensure veterans who are struggling to get to healthcare appointments are able to do that. We also have funds that support burial removal for housing. So this could be things like paying for household items or old fees that they need to get rid of so that they can, start electricity and those types of things again. Our developmental disabilities services continue to grow with many mid-year adds to their position management authority for additional HS specialist ones, service coordinators to meet the increased state requirements and additional eligible clients as supported by the state's forecasting models. And you've seen some of those changes happened in pretty significantly in the 2021-22 budget. So revenue, our veterans, line 334.09, base funding remains largely flat, from ODVA, and personnel costs rose significantly due to our CBA changes. This will require additional investment in county general fund if this program is to keep at the current rates. And again, as much as Ken pointed out with the other one, this is where you see the second general fund request come in that separate memo. So you've got information there for you. And I'm happy to answer questions about that now or when we get there later as well. The state health grant, line 334.11, funds experienced a 10% increase in the 21-23 biennium associated with increased case management services for our eligible developmental disabilities clients. This funding amendment was accepted in July 2021, and new positions were added to this funding in January 2022 as we went through that process with our Board of Commissioners. A handful of personnel changes in our developmental disabilities budget. The necessary new FTE was added mid-year 21-22 due to the timing of the revenue that we received. Again, I can refer you back to item C in your packet. This included 2 FTE of office specialists, 1 FTE of program manager time, 3 FTE of HS Specialist 1s, which are our service coordinators, 1 FTE of HS Specialist 2 for our quality assurance specialists. And so if you have any questions of those, please let me know. Overall, for the 2022-23 budget, we request to reclassify 5 FTE of HS Specialist 1s to HS Specialist 2s due to the increased complexity of the work in accordance with our intellectual developmental disabilities contract with the state. Again, those were reflected in the reclassification memo. We also request to reclass 1 FTE of program supervisor to an HS Specialist 2 for greater alignment with increased complexity of work in accordance, again, with the same program. Materials and services, our contract line 611.02 includes storage of our digitalized health records and Relias for our training. Grant expenses, line 611.3 includes expenses for our veterans mini grant, which was secured after this budget was built. We will include expense authority here when we move into adopt. The mini grant is invoice based, so we will include a similar forecast in our revenue line. Line 69910 for longer term supports, 699.12 for family financial assistance, 699.25 for DD in-home supports. Our challenging forecast for the expense arises only when an item is approved on a care plan. And so it makes it very hard to project. These, just for a little bit more information, these are items like wheelchair ramps or other household assistance that people might need that come up throughout the fiscal year. Okay, any questions about veterans or our intellectual developmental disabilities programs? Okay, and we will move into our community support services. Overall, this program of community-based fidelity models includes things like assertive community treatment or ACT, individual placement and support, previously called supported employment or supported education. This program is overall stable with very minimal changes planned for the 22-23 budget. Across our behavioral health programs and first seen in the community supports services is our self-pay, which is line 346.10, and private insurance 34611. Variable revenue decreased by 75% for 21-22, but much of that has to do with limited groups because of COVID. We left the forecast relatively flat as we really hope and anticipate this revenue will change and again go back to pre-pandemic state, and I think we're already beginning to see some of that. Our public insurance line 346.12 revenue is increased by $200,000 associated with increased services to the Yamhill Community Care members, again, our local coordinated care organization for Medicaid. There have been no changes in this program related to our personnel, although we do have 1 reclass of administrative office specialist, program supervisor across all of our behavioral health programs, just shows up here first. Materials and services, department equipment, line 543.01 includes an estimate for replacing some outdated and broken furniture in our Abacus house. Across our behavioral health programs, showing up first in CSS, you'll see an increased advertising costs on line 640.01. The increased costs just reflect our strategies to increase our recruitment as we're seeing more and more challenges and needing to get more and more creative as we do those things. Our health-related services, 699.07, indigent expenses were adjusted down $15,000 just based on existing utilization. Any questions on community support services? Okay, we will move into family and youth services. Overall, this program is stable and there's also minimal changes here for our 22-23 planned budget. We are continuing to meet with our local school leaders to understand what their needs are for this school year and if there'll be any adjustments to any of the contracts that we currently have with the 50-50 model, where we bring Medicaid dollars for 50% of an FTE and the school brings the other 50% so that we can provide comprehensive behavioral health services to any student in need. At this point, we are hearing that Some of our bigger school contracts are actually wanting more. And so we're working closely with them to understand what exactly those needs are and how we can best meet the needs of the students and staff there. So more to come as we learn more there. The state grant and Medicaid funds we held relatively flat. Client pay, which is line 34610, and private insurance 34611 were adjusted according to our projected revenue. Public insurance 346.12 increased by about 1.6 million due to the increased Oregon Health Plan membership through Yamhill Community Care. So there's a couple of things I just want to draw your attention to under personnel that popped up here. One is there are two errors in the account description for 401.17, behavioral health director, and 401.18, HHS Administrative Services Director. They're mislabeled and we couldn't make the change, but that's okay. Sometimes it Not trying to call you out, Mike, just wanted to make sure that there was clarity there. We did not change the working titles of either of these, and they are not working for juvenile. Yes. So. Yes. Let's see. We also have an HS Human Services Technician vacancy. It's line 406.19. It was deleted and changed to an HS Associate. You can see that on 406.20, changed to a youth peer. We also underfilled one FTE of HS Specialist 2 as an HS Specialist 1 in 2021-22. So you'll see a shift in FTE on those lines, just representing that change. The continuation of changes you first saw in public health related to contract services, 611.02, schools and conferences, 612.02, and travel expenses, 630.01, continue on through the rest of these budgets as well as the continuation of the change you first saw in the community support services on the advertising related to our increased advertising costs. Any questions on family and youth? Okay. We will go into our administrative services budget managed by Christina Ferguson here. The biggest change to this division in the fiscal year is the adjustment to the allocation of our utilization management team. So this team had historically been part of the behavioral health network oversight through Yamhill Community Care. However, because now those functions are really supporting all of the quality insurance and increased need for analytics and oversight of our own electronic health record and things of that nature, it's been split through all of behavioral health, which makes sense because they're really working to support all of behavioral health. So you'll see that change reflected in the way that those allocations are made this year. Let's see. Within that revenue, we have the state grant line 334.11. The majority of expense authority for potential new state programs, but it also contains $129,000 in our state grant line for fee-for-service payments for hospitals and indigent care. Our public insurance line 346.12 revenue was reduced by the amount of revenue previously collected for us by about $800,000. And that's for us as the YCCO Behavioral Health Administration. Again, just you're seeing that change reflected. Most staffing lines appear reduced, although no staff were actually deleted, but rather the reallocation of those behavioral health staff that I mentioned across all of behavioral health rather than one section. And we do continue to need those supports both for the internal audits that we are required to do as we go and prep and be ready for OHA audits or YCCO audits, but also that coordination of care that I mentioned earlier for Yamhill Community Care members that we're still obligated to do as a community mental health program. Department equipment, which is line 543.01, includes purchases related to renovation of the new clinic space that we are hoping we will be able to move into in June, unless there's been any other updates. End of June. Maybe I should just say summertime. We have decreased community provider contracts, which is line 613.04, from 4.3 million in the that was in the 2021 budget to 3.3 million in the 21-22, and now 956,000 in the 22-23 due to those changes in our role with the Yamhill Community Care. Residential detox and other fee-for-service payments to high-cost care is now being covered directly by Yamhill Community Care versus us. And the majority of Lutheran Community Services outpatient services are now contracted directly with the CCO. And we are just keeping those ones that are directly supporting our programs, the example I gave earlier, like the transitional treatment recovery homes and the parent coaching they're providing. So small amount. We held the OHP expansion line 720.21 flat due to flat membership projections and continue to budget 1.25 million in new state grants. You can see that in line 720.11. This is that in and out money that we keep to keep that expense authority should we receive additional funds to allow us to bring them into our budget. We decreased our forecasting for our new department software, which is line 800.06 and department equipment 801.04. These two lines maintain expense authority for new server and software needs related to our electronic health record. And we have miscellaneous building remodeling line 820.01, expenses of approximately 185,000 so far in 2021-22 are related to the remodeling of the building purchased for our Newburgh clinic. And as we anticipated that remodel to be finished before 22-23, we have not budgeted additional funds. That's our figures. Yeah. So we have a couple of transfers that I wanted to just mention here. They start on page 16 of what you have. So there's an internal transfer from Cap Project. Is money. It's from 2012 to 13 that was held in Fund 040-117 as software reserve when we adopted our new electronic health record. Over time, we spent down the original 312,000 to 32,193 as of the 21-22 adopt budget. Due to an error, this money is not going to come to us through the 21-22 as anticipated, but we do expect to see 31,451 in the 22-23 budget. That change will be made before the adopt budget. Yeah, okay. Also in the transfers, we have an ending balance on line 990.01 is estimated to be about $4.9 million. About 96% of that is restricted revenue that we plan to use over a multi-year period. Largely, that's CCO capitated dollars that come to us and some CDC funding that came to us through the state for epidemiology capacity. So we'll continue to use those over the course of the years that we're able to. And then the last transfer there you'll see is a transfer of the Arpa funds, line 380.93 of 1.3 million. It's a replacement of lost variable revenue that we have discussed earlier in the presentation that occurred related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We typically collect around $2.5 million of variable revenue, and we only saw about half of that. And again, related to decreased number of people accessing services, a change in the way that we were able to provide services as well. The reduction was dramatic, but again, we hope and are anticipating that that will be increasing and we'll be able to collect those revenues as we see more and more people coming back into care. You can see the corresponding expense line on 016-093-990.03.
And I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, please do.
Because this is going to be one of the first categories where you're going to see that once you see it, when we get into the Fund 32, which is where the ARPA, this is going to be one of the first categories. Like during my presentation, I highlighted the revenue replacement and where those lines are going to be transferred. So when we get into Fund 32, because we had to build something into the budget and start building that in. So this is the first amount that you're going to see that falls into that revenue replacement category that's specifically and eligible and allowed use to offset revenue replacement within the county. So that's where that 1.3 million that's coming straight out of ARPA, out of Fund 32, straight into Fund 16. It's being transferred there. So this is one of the first times you're going to see that.
Yep, thanks, Ken.
Just thought of something, and you might have already answered this, but I know regarding the restaurant licensing fees, would we be able to use some of that revenue replacement to address that? Because I know we had the sort of the grant component of that as well.
Well, we had the grant component. You know, maybe you want to talk about, I know that's public health budget, but
Sure.
the success of that and how much interest, because it seems like there's been a little bit of.
We haven't actually seen a lot of interest in partaking of the grant. So I mean, I think Carrie Martin might have the specific figures as they were coming in through county proper to administer those grant funds. But it's my understanding that we didn't see a huge uptake of those, but certainly we can get more exact numbers on that. And Christina, I don't know if you have anything that you've noticed just in terms of our collection, which have, as we noted, was we projected around $50,000 left, but that's not unusual for us. And then we sort of shore that up as we get closer. We've actually seen an uptick in restaurants in Yamhill County, so we haven't seen a decrease in the number overall, which is promising and good. Is there anything that you would add?
One of the most challenging things to forecast related to public health is our biggest collection months for licensed revenue is January and February, right as the budget is being built. And so we always do go back in our adopt budget and refine our forecasts. I think we'll have a better sense of that once we in the next month here kind of refine that. What I would say about the grant program is that we did extensive outreach and engagement every time that we even received a payment in. My instructions to my staff were to reach out and let them know that there is a grant program and would they like to apply for that prior to us processing their checks. And so we went to great lengths to ensure that they knew of those opportunities and could take advantage of that. So I think as much as we were able to spend from that generous grant allotment from the board, we did so. I don't have updated numbers in front of me, but I know that we've been keeping our files up to date as those costs continue to grow. So I'd be happy to get that back to you.
That's fine. Thank you. Appreciate
And it looks
that.
like there's still 5,000 that's being transferred to the public health budget.
That's different.
Oh, this is
Yeah,
a different
that's
one.
Yeah, the different
Oh, that's
was,
right.
yeah,
Yes, thank you. That is the one that we have had.
that's the one that we've had for events,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That from 1039, we do a transfer each year of $5,000 to discretionary fund to public health for that specific purpose, which is a little bit different than the original grant program for restaurant licensing, which was CARES Act funding that we identified 2 years ago that we were using to offer a grant to offset the costs of restaurant licensing renewals. So
I will say we continue to see the amount of funds that the state is allocating out of our funding stream, the very small amount of funding that we get, meaning that our fees keep increasing, even if we're not increasing our fees, but they're increasing because of some of the state costs that are then reflected back on us. And so even as many of you know, we are under collecting and have been under collecting for some time and have had a process of slowly increasing our fees. As we're doing that, we're continuing to see our expenses go up at a higher rate. And so it is a challenging process. And I'll be back here, I believe in June, to be talking about our rates so we can spend more time with that then.
And if you're curious, that surcharge that Lindsay is speaking to is back in the public health budget on 070. It's on line 730.02. You can, the only thing on that line, so you can kind of see how it's trended up year over year.
So so this is sort of the first introduction for the revenue loss ARPA funds. Where is the public health response ARPA fund? How's that represented? Maybe you haven't gotten to it yet.
I don't think we've gotten to that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Good. Just wanna ask.
Well, there's a couple places though that I would call out because there's some direct that I'm going to let Lindsay talk about, but then also as part of the discretionary allocation increase that went out to all departments, and I know we haven't got to 1002 and some of those, but in order to support that and in recognition of the revenue impacts and the cost impacts of COVID, I am proposing that a portion of that increase that was approved also be utilized ARPA under both the public health and revenue replacement as well. So I'll just say that, and then I'll turn it back to Lindsay.
Okay, great.
It'll make much more sense when we get to Fund 32.
Okay. But until then, just keep jumping in, Ken.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So our next division to talk about is enhanced residential and outreach, starting on page 17 for y'all. Overall, again, this is another program that's stable with minimal changes. Client fees, which is line 346.10, were updated to reflect ongoing revenue for our single EFC slot paid for by client trust via their guardian. So it's very specific to this program. This type of revenue is atypical for this program, and it's usually almost entirely state grant and Medicaid dollars. Our private insurance, line 346.11, revenue includes an amount coded here in error that should be public insurance, which is line 34612. A journal entry will be done in May to correct that. We have one personnel change, which is the reclassification of 6 FTE HS associates to HS specialist ones to support increased responsibilities in those roles. Again, those are reflected in the reclassification memo. Continuation changes that you first saw in public health related to the contract services, schools and conferences, and travel are obviously carrying through here. And then the continuation of the change from CSS and advertising is also carried through here. And is all for their enhanced residential and outreach. Moving on to housing and recovery supports on line, or excuse me, page 20. This is a program that includes our transitional treatment and recovery homes, known as our TTRS homes, our rental assistance program, supported and supportive housing programs, including all of our master lease facilities, and our newest one in Sheridan, which just opened this last month to get the first half of individuals moved in, and then construction will begin on the second half as well. It also includes places like Bridges, Homeport, and Sunnyside for our just various supported housing. This program is funded largely with state grants funds. You can see those in line 334.11 in the amount of $653,000, got $1.2 million in public insurance, line 346.12, and local DHS contracts, line 346.13 in the amount of $312,000. We left our public insurance line flat for the 22-23 budget, despite seeing an increase of the $312,000 in 21-22. It was one-time funding related to a grant opportunity we had from Yamhill Community Care to support the Sheridan Housing Project. Our new master lease program I mentioned in Sheridan, plus the previous master lease programs like Bakersfield's transitional housing and Aspen Ridge generate rental income, and you can see that on line 362.04. It's estimated on an 85% occupancy. We undercollected in 21-22 due to delays in opening of the Sheridan Housing Project. But now that the project's open, we held those projections flat as they represent an annual collection for that program. We have 2 small personnel additions. One is adding 0.53 FTE of an HS technician for recruitment of a full-time, and an HS technician to support the 0.475 FTE that already exists. So just that one that we're requesting to shore it up and make it a full-time position. Expenses for supported housing master lease costs appear on line 611.30. You'll see this was under expense due to the delay in the Sheridan Housing Project. But now that it's opened, we again kept that flat in our forecast. You'll see the continuation of changes from public health, in the contract services, school conferences, and travel expenses also reflected here. So our final division is our adult behavioral health. This is our general outpatient programs and our crisis programs. Like all of our behavioral health programs, workforce has been challenged significantly, hiring challenges, retention, recruitment challenges. And at the same time, we've had new opportunities for expanded services that exist related to a number of things such as Measure 110, access to care funding, which should be decided hopefully soon in terms of how much of those funds will be coming to us and what they'll be supporting in Yamhill County. State grant line 334.11 will be adjusted before they adopt budget to include new mobile crisis funding from the state. Our public insurance line 346.12 increased revenue allocation due to utilization, increased by our medication assisted treatment program. This is a program that supports individuals in recovery from opioids. And we've seen that program grow and grow over the couple of years that we've had it. The personnel changes, again, you can see them more succinctly in items B and C in your packet, but I'll go over them here really quickly. Adding 1 FTE of HS specialists due to the evolution of outpatient program needs in McMinnville. This position also correlates with the deletion of a 0.5 FTE HS spec 2, which is line 406.23. We're adding 1 FTE of senior office specialists in Newburgh to support the growth of those clinic operations. Adding 1 FTE of HS associate for a urinalysis tech to support increased substance use and medication assisted treatment services in McMinnville. Adding 1 FTE registered nurse time, line 406.07 for increased medication assisted treatment services again in McMinnville. Adding 1 FTE of program manager for our growing crisis program. Adding 1 FTE of HS associate for a peer support specialist in our crisis and criminal justice programs. 1 FTE of HS specialist for a certified drug and alcohol counselor, also in our crisis and juvenile justice programs. Adding 0.25 FTE of HS specialist 2 in order to recruit for a full-time position to support increased needs in McMinnville. 0.75 FTE already exists, and we want to add the 0.25 knowing that we will likely have a better chance at recruitment, recruiting for a full-time position, and certainly the need is there to warrant it as well. Adding 1 FTE of HS specialist 3 for increased services in our Newburgh clinic site, and then adding 0.5 FTE of HS specialist 3 for our Newburgh crisis services. 0.5 already exists, and we're wanting to add an additional 0.5 to increase that to 1 full-time position. Due to increased engagement in our medication assisted treatment program, again, we're purchasing more medications, and you can see that reflected in line 512.01. We have increased expenses on the professional services line 610.01. It includes telehealth contracts with Iris to help fill some of the need of our behavioral health staffing challenges that we're experiencing. And so using some more of those contracts, hopefully temporarily as we get the workforce stabilized. The professional, the professional contract line 610.25 services line will also be adjusted before adopt as we further refined our forecast of expenses of our psychiatric nurse practitioners that land on this line versus the registered nurse 3 line, which is 406.08. That's based on the way that we are finding our psychiatric nurse practitioners, again, having more luck using those contracts versus employing like we typically do. We adjusted the forecast on permits and licenses, like 695.13, based on our past utilization. This is the employee reimbursement workforce retention strategy for license fees that are required for their employment and, through various things, whether that's as a nursing license or as a therapist. So those are all the division budgets. Are there any questions on any of those specifics? Okay, so I'm here. Couple of things that I'll just mention. This has come up a number of times, came up when Ken was presenting, and it came up as I was going through our budget, is just the overall workforce challenges with retention and recruitment. We are working really hard to try to determine what we can do to not just get new employees, but keep the employees that we have. We have amazing, amazing people doing services, and they're hard jobs every single day, and they've gotten harder every single day over the last 2 years. And we are working really hard to find ways that we can support them. We're working with them to identify what makes you want to stay here, what will make you want to stay here. Because we know as soon as one person leaves, that just increases the workload of the other people that are here. And of course, you can imagine that's a snowball effect. So we're working hard to try to identify strategies throughout, we have been for the last 2 years and will continue to do so. We also see continued significant administrative burden from Oregon Health Authority around how we administer our programs and the things that they're expecting from us in terms of reporting and all sorts of challenges administratively. We also see OHA and that happening with the local CCO. And then as a downstream contractor, we're feeling it from that perspective as well. We're working really closely, largely through our association, to work with Oregon Health Authority and find ways to make sure that the information that we're collecting, whether that's information we're collecting from our clients or information that we're reporting back to the state, are things that are meaningful and useful, and that it's not just collecting information to collect information. So we hope that they continue to be supportive in those conversations. And at this moment in time, there is a lot of great dialogue happening that's making me feel more hopeful than perhaps I've felt in the last couple of years. So that's good news. But I'm going to end here with some great opportunities. And I mentioned some of these throughout the presentation. One of them is our public health modernization dollars. Public health modernization started several years ago when there was really a need identified through the legislative process, through the legislature really, of challenges with the public health and the way public health was funded. All of the funding is very specific and cannot be used in very many ways other than the narrow ways in which it's dedicated. There's also great differences among health departments, right? If you go into one public health department, you've seen one public health department. And that means that some places had lots of resources and they were able to do all sorts of things, and other places were bare bones, where public health administrators were also janitors. So through a legislative process, the goal with public health modernization was really to bring all public health divisions and departments across the state up to some level that we should expect throughout the state, having some level of epidemiology, having some level of communication support, data analytics, things that we know that we need to have in order to provide services to the community and to keep the community health and safe, which is ultimately what public health is responsible for. So the investment with public health modernization over the course of the last couple of years, with the biggest investment being about $60 million through the 21 legislative session, has made tremendous impacts locally for us. It's allowed us to add things like data analytics, epidemiology capacity, communications capacity, things that we've never had before. And thank goodness we were able to add them through the pandemic. Otherwise, our response would have looked very different in Yamhill County. So we know that there is going to be continued asks for public health modernization in the future, because even though we are very grateful for those funds that came to us through this last session, the session before that, that is a pretty small drop in the bucket based on the analysis that was done about 7 years ago of what we would need to have a fully functioning public health system in Oregon. So I'll certainly be coming to the board and sharing more information as we get closer to this next legislative session on what that looks like and what we can anticipate from that. The other exciting things are really in our behavioral health programs. I mentioned the mobile crisis dollars coming to us. We're very excited that this will allow us to expand our full mobile crisis operations to 24/7 on site, being able to work closely, not only just with law enforcement like we do now, but with other partners like community EMS and things of that nature. We also are anticipating getting upwards of $2.8 million to invest locally in behavioral health housing. This is new money that we haven't seen yet, but we are anticipating, and based on the forecast and the funding formula, it looks like $2.8 million is what we can anticipate in Yamhill County. We're already working very closely with partners like YCAP, Housing Authority, the CCO, and we'll continue to work with other partners like NAMI and peer organizations to understand where those most significant needs related to behavioral health housing are. What I anticipate is that we will have investments made throughout the spectrum of housing in places that we know we need, whether that includes more crisis support housing, transitional housing, as well as additional investments in this permanent supported housing like the projects in Sheridan or Aspen Ridge. And then, of course, the behavioral health regional network funding, the Measure 110 dollars. We know that we will be seeing some eventually, and we hope that we'll be seeing them in the next couple of months. Overall, the submitted proposal from Yamhill County, which included investments directly to Yamhill County Health and Human Services, but also included investments in community partners, peer organizations, housing organizations. The overall proposal was about $9 million. We anticipate that our chunk of funding that we'll get from the Measure 110 dollars will be around 7 million. So we're waiting to hear how that will come out, and if they will be determining which components of that proposal will be funded, or if they'll be telling us this is how much money you get, and as a community you can decide how to allocate that. We're not sure what that will look like yet, but we anticipate that our application will be reviewed, I believe, May 13th, May 12th. So fingers crossed, and we'll know more about it then. Lastly, I just want to say thank you again to my amazing team, to the two folks you see sitting next to me, and also to the amazing management team, the managers and supervisors who are not here today, but have been working so hard for the last 2 years, not only to keep doors open, services, for the community out there and at the high standard that we have here, but also supporting the teams and our staff. Can't say it enough. We have amazing staff, and they keep showing up every day, despite how hard it's been. And I'm so grateful to all of them. And I know that they show up every day to provide amazing service to our community, and our community is really lucky to have them. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any additional ones.
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the work that you do, and I don't think we have any idea just what it's like on the front lines for a lot of the folks that work on your team. It's been tough the last few years. Seen a lot of pain in our community. A couple of things I just wanted to, in terms of working with the state, what are you seeing as far as the importance of our local engagement, county engagement with OHA or through your CLO or some of the other organizations, of how important it is for the county to be engaged with the state in state issues?
Yeah. I would say, I think when we're talking about those state issues that directly reflect and impact the way that we're able to operate locally, certainly we have a huge role. And that's why we use our associations, whether it be Coalition of Local Health Authorities or Association of Community Mental Health Programs, AOCMHP, really to help support that unified voice. And also to make sure that the communities that are so different throughout the state are all reflected in those decisions when we're talking about financing. So when we're looking at making sure that, whether it's the Measure 110 dollars or Measure 108 dollars, really wanting to make sure that the state is looking statewide at how they're investing those types of dollars and how they're using them is really critical and really important. So I think utilization of those associations is very helpful. Helps create that unified voice. And then of course, at the county level, there's the Association of Oregon Counties that's supportive in terms of being a voice as well.
Thank you.
Chair, I have a quick question. Sure. Where did you say that the Measure 110 grant dollars would be out? What fund would it be going to?
It would be largely in our adult behavioral health services.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not budgeted yet because we haven't received any revenue, but largely it would be throughout there in the adult outpatient.
Okay. And then last year, I want to say we had a discussion about the CCO. I think you were predicting maybe some increase in membership because Polk County closed. Is that correct? I'm remembering that.
Yeah, so there had been some shifts in the CCO, and I forget, it was Mid-Valley, I'm forgetting the full name, but one of the CCOs, yeah, in the sort of Salem Polk area. And so there was some absorption. There has been some membership increases to YCCO or Yamhill Community Care, both in Washington and Polk counties around the sort of fringe areas. So you are seeing some growth there, and we are seeing that subsequent growth in the budget reflective of that.
Okay, but budgeting flat.
In overall OHP growth at this point, yes. Okay. Yeah, we're not anticipating it go up higher. In membership, yeah.
In membership, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
No, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. There you go.
I mean,
How did
it's
that
still
happen?
03, as far as I know, so. Always been 03.
All right, so typically what we've done in these cases when we have a few extra minutes is we also try to make sure we'll jump into some of the other smaller budgets. It's the ones particular that are more internal services or admin. And I thought we would take advantage. I know Carolina's in the process of picking up lunch. And so if the committee's okay, I have a few funds that I would like to jump into because I know that we start running into appointments and schedules, and with the public hearing at 5:30 tonight, you know, I think the closer we can wrap around 4 with the presentations today, or the closer to that, it just allows a little more time to step away, take a deep breath before we get in the hearing. So if hearing no objections, if you want to go to page 121, I figure there's a few here that I could jump through really quickly. So the tab, if it helps, it should be non-departmental is the tab.
In the back. Is that us?
No.
No.
The water.
It'll be behind there. There's also a Manila internal service tab, and then right behind that should be the non-departmental. You find it there?
It's cleared the back here. Oh, I sure did.
All right, is everyone there? So 1039 non-departmental. Want me to just run with this one, Justin, or were you going to plan on it presenting this one?
Marker.
Was that
Doesn't
on
matter
your-
to me. I don't mind.
Thanks for unmuting yourself. You're muted, Justin.
Were you doing this one or me? Was that
I
on
don't
your list?
remember. I'm looking
I'll
at
just
my
do
notes.
it.
Okay,
I'll just jump right in.
all right.
I'm a big mouth. So 1039 non-departmental. So this is one of those. So Fund 10 represents most of our general fund departments. If they're a general fund department receiving discretionary, there's a few exceptions within Fund 10, but a majority of them are all predominantly a majority of their funding is general fund. So for Fund 10, we have this account called 1039, which is non-departmental. Historically, it's been a thorn in our side. This is always a fun one to manage, but there's a lot of costs in here that can't be attributed to a single department. That's why we call it non-departmental. There's also like for insurance payments and things like that, that instead of we charge, like HHS pays liability insurance and workers' comp, they pay directly into Fund 80 if they're a non-general fund department like HHS. Everyone who's in Fund 10, with the exception of a couple of the planning department and a couple that are Fund 10 that aren't true general fund departments, all the other costs come straight out of 1039. So we have a discretionary allocation that comes in here. So you'll see some lines when I get into this that where the property insurance calculation that we do to make sure that we're collecting for all departments enough to pay the premiums for property insurance, it's going to come out of 1039. For non-general fund departments like HHS, community corrections, some of those, we kind of have a formula and we charge them directly. Because again, there's a lot of restricted funds in those departments. And so in order to make sure that they're paying their share for the internal services that are required for them to operate, we basically charge admin fees or internal fees to those non-general fund departments to collect that, to make sure that we have enough revenue to keep the lights on, pay our insurance, et cetera. So 1039, this one's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of changes. As far as the revenues go, this is one that we budget pretty closely. In fact, there's times that we've had to transfer appropriation authority because sometimes the costs have come in higher. But for the most part, you can see that, you know, we're projecting a $5,000, $5,800 beginning balance. Here we have the electric coop tax that comes into this. The Newburgh bypass, the 95,400. This is where we collect revenue for the Parkway Committee and the lobbyists that are working on behalf of both the county and also the Parkway Committee and all the jurisdictions that are involved with the bypass. The county collects from the cities that pay into that, and that the revenue is recorded here. So that 95,400 represents what the county collects from the jurisdictions to pay for the lobbyist each year.
And what's our share? What's our?
That's in Fund 26. I would have to pull up Fund 26, but when I'm presenting economic development, I can highlight where the county share. We use economic development funds to pay the county share of that. So the 95,400, again, it's a pass through. We collect it from the cities, and then you'll see the pass through down below 61001. That's where we pay for the lobbying services that works with Parkway Committee. So not a lot of changes as far as the revenues go. Not a lot of changes for the expenses, other than if you go down, you'll see 780.27, which is internal liability insurance. That number is quite a bit higher this year. That's because of the way renewals are looking right now. It's really hard because we're still in the process of doing our insurance renewals. So we haven't finalized on numbers from CIS. But we are seeing an increase with our insurance. So this is one of those that it's 1039 transfers of funds to Fund 80, and Fund 80 is where we actually pay our insurance bills from. Otherwise, 1039 is pretty straightforward, and unlike in past years where we haven't had to make any substantial changes.
What happened in 2021?
Ken,
Oh,
can you hear me, Ken?
yes.
So the internal liability insurance went up, but the internal property insurance went down, which is nice. But is there a difference in the actual rates, or is this due to a change in the volume of property being insured or the dollar amount it's being insured for?
Justin, do you want to take that?
I think it's probably a combination of things. And yeah, there are some properties that we were able to take off the rolls that helped decrease that amount. And that's probably the primary contributor to that. But we're not seeing the same like hard market as you are for liability insurance. That market is just super hard right now.
Our experience has been really positive, and I don't want to jinx it when I'm talking about insurance reserve, but our experience has been really positive when it comes to property insurance, just like workers' comp. Now that I said it out loud, you know,
You don't have that much power.
I hope not.
And we had a recent audit done by CIS, our insurance provider. And so that probably, relooking at things helped give us a more accurate number that reduced that cost.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Denny, did you have a question?
On the 2021, it actual is 2.3. What was the $1 million bump in there? Am I reading that right?
Under which one?
Actual. That number.
For the total.
For the actual, yeah. I mean, the year before was just under $1 million, and everything's been just under $1 million.
The one caution that I would have is when you're looking at am I looking at the right one?
There was 1.4 million of other expense in 2020, 2021. If you slide.
Oh, yeah. That's what I looked
Reimbursement.
at.
Yes.
Oh, in 2021.
Yeah, it's just-
The 39,362.12.
I'm trying to remember. That's 2 years ago.
yeah.
There was a specific expense. I believe that may have been CARES Act related. I'm
Was that
trying.
where it came in? And then went out at? Yeah.
I can get it. there was a one-time expense that we handled with other expense in here for that 1.4 million. I'm just not remembering right off the top of my head, but I can get an answer.
I was here. It wouldn't have even been when you were
Oh, that
budget,
would've been
because it
outside.
would have come in to some other account and then gone out through here to maybe the restaurants and other impacted industries. Do you remember, Commissioner Starrett? It was the $10,000 grants that we did in the fall.
Well,
It was my apology, and now I remember it. It was specific. Ow. Okay. Yes. Sorry, I just racked my knee. So that 1.4 million that was in there, both the revenue and the expense, was specific to a CARES Act direct allocation that we had from the state of Oregon at kind of a last second business industry grant. The board may remember that there was like a quick turnaround that they notified us in November. We have 1.4 million for emergency business grants. We basically had to flip that, and in 6 weeks we put those funds out, and the revenue and expense was included in 1039 for that specific program. I just need to rack my knee on the desk and my memory comes back.
We're laughing at the memory loss because it's like consistent across the board.
Thank you, Kate.
All right. So any questions on 1039? So on the next page, on page 122, is federal funds, and specifically these are Title III funds. And I think I do this one correct. I'm looking at Mike because sometimes he does the other federal funds. So ONC Title III funds, we budget for revenue, but we haven't seen revenue in quite some time. So we carry these funds forward. We make sure that they're fully appropriated. There's specific uses. There's limitations on what we can use Title III funds for. Search and rescue operations on federal lands, fire-wise community workshops. So there's really just those specific areas that are covered. It's my microphone. Okay. Okay.
Mine's not on. Mine's not on.
All right.
Oh,
Okay.
I should turn it on.
I just suddenly, I hear my voice and then I don't hear my voice. So for the Title III funds, we appropriate the full amount in case there's, we try to make sure in case there is a search and rescue operation that occurs, or if we do get a funding request. Last year was one of the first times in quite some time that we did get a funding request for the fire-wise programs, which are occurring right now, the spring of this year, performed by Soil and Water Conservation District are doing programs. So a $10,000 grant was awarded there. So the revenues, when you're looking at this, you're going to see $20,000 that we have $10,000 in ONC Title III and $10,000 in federal forest. Those are placeholders in case we do get the funding. But if you look at the year to date, we don't know. That's subject to federal legislation on whether or not those funds get released. Otherwise, we appropriate the full 93,000. And anything that we don't spend carries over to the next fiscal year. Okay. Any questions on Title III? All right. I don't know if this is one I want to tackle in 5 minutes, but I'm going to give it a shot. So on page 123, this is ARPA. So what you're going to see here, if you look at the proposed budget under, the column 20, you'll see 20 proposed budget. So, we projected an $11,708,067 beginning balance. So we're anticipating between the nonprofit grants and the water and sewer infrastructure that we're going to spend. This is what we're going to be left with of the $22 million. So we have that budgeted, and you'll see that we are earning pool interest. We do have to keep, like all of our funds, we have to keep our
funds in an interest-bearing account. We have a separate LGIP account that's set up at the state that's holding these separate from where the rest of our funds are held. So we are seeing some interest earnings based on the amount that we've had in the account. So that beginning balance is takes into account that we are going to get the nonprofit grants rolled out and the water and sewer infrastructure, and that's what's going to be left. So further down, when you get into the expense lines, so you'll see under grants awarded, water and sewer infrastructure, we budgeted nothing because that program we already issued checks. Impacted industries, based on the discussions, we have 906,000. Workforce development, you're going to see that we've identified we have $1,360,000 available there. For the child care, you have the 2.2 million. And then the 1 million for the rural broadband. So that really represents the impacted industries are for economic development, and then it also, you know, all those various categories and the rural broadband. When you get down below, and you'll see the 1.3 million that Lindsay just talked about for revenue replacement. The other part that we built into this budget or proposed is the $260,000 transfer to the fairgrounds. Again, the fairgrounds was one of our venues that during the pandemic was impacted pretty significantly because there was a fair cancellation, and they have a lot of needs there. So that's not a program that can go without a major event. And it really relies on the revenues associated with the events. And I know Gary is going to be presenting this afternoon. So you're going to see in that budget, the 260,000 that I have built into this budget, you're going to be transferred to the fairgrounds to help with those revenue losses.
Can I have two questions for you? Oh, Chair.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. First, it was 6.8 million, right, for water sewer.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a place that we're seeing the money go out except for in the year-to-date actual of 3 million?
The one caveat that I would have is the year-to-date actuals were run based on when this report was run.
That's what I thought. Great.
That year-to-date figure does not represent where we're at today.
Yeah, and our adopted will have that in it.
It will.
Okay, great.
Correct.
And then the other thing was just that 2.3 million Senator Boquist money for broadband. Where does that show up in the fund?
That's not going to be in here because I want to keep the funds separate, because these ARPA funds require me to file reports with the Treasury, where those other funds, I have to file reports to DOS, Department of Administrative Services at the state. So those funds are not included in here. Those funds are going to show up in Fund 4161, which is the capital grants projects. And when we go over Fund 40, I'll be able to call those out.
Perfect. Thank you.
So that's a budgetary and reporting function, is I want to make sure that we don't have that 2.3 million mixed in with these funds. These funds should only represent our direct ARPA allocation that came directly to the county. So that other 2.3 million that we received from the state that are also ARPA funds, but that came through the state to us. It was not a direct allocation. We're budgeting the revenue and expense for that in Fund 40. And it's just a way to keep it separated for reporting purposes and for accountability. And hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you.
And then the last one, the big line, the 4.4 million that is in the transfer to general fund. Now, there's a couple of things. There was a question before, Commissioner Bershauer, you asked about the funds for public health. Those funds are in this amount. This is not actually going directly to HHS. It's actually going to go to Fund 1002 and then to Fund 40, which is our capital reserve, because the intention is to use those funds to either make improvements or possibly a new building
for public health. And so we're going to be budgeting that in 4027, which is our capital reserve fund that we use for all building remodels and acquisitions and construction.
I have a question follow-up to that.
You might want to use your microphone so that everyone can.
Okay. As far as the revenue replacement for HHS,
Mhm.
how are we addressing that? Which,
That's the 1.3 million that's up above.
but you're, okay, but that's not. So that's not going to be considered a capital.
No.
Okay.
Under US Treasury rules, the county can elect to take instead of doing a calculation on revenue, we can take what is kind of like a standard deduction under the Treasury, up to $10 million. We can take $10 million of our ARPA allocation, identify that as revenue replacement, and then we would transfer up to $10 million, but then we would still spend the funds based on priorities and the policy decision of the board. So what I'm proposing and what this represents is about $9.8 million is going to be transferred from this fund or handled like revenue replacement because it significantly reduces the reporting burden to the US Treasury, which I just did our quarterly report on Friday, and it's not enjoyable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you see here, that 4.4 million includes capital investments. You'll see a couple transfers in Fund 40. One is for the Oracle project, which is our ERP software, which if anything, the pandemic proved that we needed to update our software because we have a lot of reliance on paper and for tracking, and there's a lot of limitations with our current system. So that's why it's going to help if we make some of these ARPA funds available to offset the cost for that Oracle ERP replacement project. And then the other funds will go into 4027, which is for future capital construction. But the nice part is by calling it revenue replacement, we take the timelines and the restrictions associated to ARPA off of the funds because we can do this as part of revenue replacement.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you.
And so it's a little bit different. So the 1.3 million that you see above that Lindsay talked about is a direct allocation to HHS for revenue replacement. And then it'll be up to the HHS team on how they budget those and utilize those funds. But it's also hope that some of those funds, because we're also going to be looking at Lindsay and HHS to also use some Fund 16 HHS funds to also contribute and offset the cost for capital construction as well, depending on what's proposed.
Okay.
So can, we have almost 3 million for revenue loss. So is the difference between HHS and FAIR, is that in line 0.93? Is 0.93 the difference of that plus public health?
Correct.
Okay. So did we have requests from other departments for revenue loss? Transfer back?
You're going to hear requests throughout this week.
Okay.
So that's going to be another one where there's going to be requests all throughout this week. That's another reason why these funds were moved to 1002 and are included as part of the general fund discretionary. So if other departments are making a funding request, but I'm also, like I mentioned earlier, looking at a portion of that 4.4 is to pay for the up to 6% discretionary allocation increase that was approved for this year as well, to offset those costs of that increase in allocation as well.
Okay.
So actually every department that receives a general fund discretionary allocation is getting some of these funds.
In a portion of it.
Got it.
Correct.
Okay. And just, how is the 1.3 transferred to HHS? How did we come up with that? What?
I actually had Lindsay and her team actually run actual revenue replacement numbers and provide those numbers, which like she mentioned before, this is not the full amount to cover the revenue impacts that they did experience. So this was a number I came up with that would at least close the gap, but not 100% restore their lost revenue. Because the two largest departments that probably experienced the most revenue impact was HHS. And then the fairgrounds was another one that I recognized with the cancellation of the events that they had was another easy one. Those were two that felt the most impact.
All right, thank you, Ken. We're gonna recess. What time will we be back?
Oh, did we have another sheet? though?
5:30.
There's one more. but
You
I don't
wanna get this last one done in this section?
This one's really quick. I can do it.
Let's do it.
Okay.
All right.
So Fund 50 federal funds. These are O&C funds. This is another one where we keep an eye. We have been seeing funds coming in from O&C. You'll see in 1920 and 2021 where we did receive some revenue, but year to date, we haven't received anything yet, or at the time this report was run. So essentially, if there's, this is a discretionary fund that historically the Board of Commissioners have been used to fund one-time project requests or one-time grant projects throughout the year. And it's also one of the funds that when we get into deliberations on Wednesday, if depending on the requests we receive tonight, if we want to fund those, this is one of the funds that we have available to fund one-time requests. So we haven't spent a lot out of this in prior years. And so it's a pretty, significant beginning balance. 629,000 is what we have projected. Again, the other 100,000, that's a placeholder. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. And then down below, you'll see under 699.01, we budget all of that as other expenses, 721,000. But if you approve grant awards or during the budget year, the Board of Commissioners approve a funding request that may come up during the year, then we record the actual expense to 700.27, which is grant awarded. But this is another one where we appropriate the full amount, make sure we have it available to fund one-time requests as they come up, either this week or during the budget year.
So, Chair, a question. So, based on that, that placeholder for the O&C, what are we basing that on? Is that, do we have any kind of an idea, any projection, or is it just historical?
Well, it's a couple things. Mike?
Yeah, it does come in every year. You can look at 1920 and 2021, that O&C money came in about 103,000, then 85,000. It comes in May, so we just haven't seen what it'll be this year yet. But it has come every year pretty.
And we do, for all of our revenues, we'll do a combination unless we get something official that tells us exactly how much, to receive. We'll, in some funding resources, we do have that kind of detailed information. But for the most part, we also do a look back, and we have the 100,000. We've seen it go anywhere from 85 to 103. But again, if it comes in less than that, we can't. We adjust our spending based on the actual revenues. So that's another one that it'll be on the list that on Wednesday I'll share more information, but this is another one of those that depending on if a request comes forward, a one-time request, this is one of the funds that are available to fund a project or fund a request from it. And this is discretionary. So that means it's completely, it's not restricted funds.
All right, thank you, Ken.
Except we can't use them in the lobby, right? That's not the new thing.
Correct.
Jason, I just say that they added this component of it that you can't lobby the federal government with this money.
Okay, well, I think lunches are ready and it's in the Oak Room. So we have a conference room that's just on the other side. So if you go out the room 32 and around the hallway, there's a small conference room and it's complete, it's to go. So it's up to you. You can have a seat, have lunch, or if you need to, like I know a lot of times we're usually all running out the door to answer phone calls, emails, things like that, and we're eating on the go. So if you want to grab something and go, it's all your lunch orders are there. And I think we resume at 1 o'clock.
1:30.
1:30. Okay. Heck, we could do 5. No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
Oh, you can, if you want to leave stuff in the room, you can. We're going to lock the doors and we'll have the room secured.
All right, let's adjourn.
Oh, and you want to recess this?
All right, let's adjourn.